Hey friends, about 70% of folks watching my videos aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these stories, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a like, leave a comment, and let me know where you're tuning in from. It was summer 2023 when I decided to leave behind the chaos of my life in San Francisco and start anew in Pine Ridge, a small town. My name is Bart Crowley, and at 35 years old, I was ready for a change. I never really fit in anywhere, always feeling like an outsider looking in. Pine Ridge, with its population of just over 5,000 and vast surrounding forests, seemed like the perfect place to disappear and reinvent myself. I found a small cabin on the outskirts of town, nestled against the edge of the dense pine forest that gave the town its name. It was nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom structure with a small kitchen, living area, and bathroom. But it was mine, and it was far from the mistakes and regrets I'd left behind in the city. The first week was spent settling in, unpacking the few possessions I'd brought with me, and getting to know my new surroundings. The townsfolk were friendly enough, if a bit wary of newcomers. I caught whispers and curious glances as I made my way through the local grocery store or grabbed a coffee at the diner. There was something in their eyes, a mix of curiosity and concern. I brushed it off as small-town suspicion of outsiders. After all, what did I know about living in a place like this? My entire life had been spent in cities, surrounded by noise and people. The silence here was almost deafening at times, especially at night when the only sounds were the whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional hoot of an owl. By the end of that first week, I was feeling restless. The cabin, once a symbol of my fresh start, was beginning to feel confining. I needed to get out to explore my new surroundings. That's when I decided to take a hike in the woods that Saturday morning. Little did I know that this simple decision would change my life forever. Not in the way I had hoped when I moved to Pine Ridge. As I prepared for my hike that morning, I couldn't shake a feeling of unease. It was subtle, like a whisper at the edge of my consciousness, but persistent. I chopped it up to nerves about venturing into unfamiliar territory and focused on getting ready. I packed a small rucksack with water, some energy bars, and a basic first aid kit. As an afterthought, I tossed in a small flashlight and a pocket knife. Better safe than sorry, right? I pulled on a pair of sturdy boots, grabbed my hat, and headed out the door. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of pine. As I locked the cabin door behind me, I took a deep breath, trying to calm my inexplicable nerves. The forest loomed before me, a wall of green and brown stretching as far as the eye could see. I squared my shoulders and set off down the narrow trail that led into the woods. Little did I know that with each step I was walking deeper into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The trail started off easy enough, a well-worn path that wound its way through the towering pines. Shafts of sunlight broke through the canopy, dappling the forest floor with patches of warm light. Birds chirped overhead, and occasionally I'd hear the rustle of some small animal scurrying through the underbrush. As I walked, I tried to shake off the lingering unease that had followed me from the cabin. The forest was beautiful, I told myself. There was nothing to fear here, just nature in all its glory. I forced myself to focus on the details around me, the rough bark of the trees, the soft crunch of pine needles under my feet, the play of light and shadow on the path ahead. About an hour into my hike, the trail began to narrow and grow steeper. The trees seemed to press in closer, their branches intertwining overhead to create a green tunnel. The bird songs grew fewer and farther between, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to swallow up even the sound of my footsteps. I paused, taking a swig from my water bottle and surveying my surroundings. The forest had changed subtly. The pines were older here, their trunks massive and gnarled. Moss hung in long strands from the branches, swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. The air felt thicker, almost humid, despite the cool temperature. For a moment I considered turning back. Something about this part of the forest felt off, but I quickly dismissed the thought. I was being ridiculous. It was just an unfamiliar environment. That's all. I was letting my imagination run wild. Besides, I'd come thus far. Might as well push on a bit further. As I continued down the path, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every so often, I'd catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. The silence grew deeper, pressing against my ears like a physical thing. I tried to distract myself by thinking about my plans for the cabin, the new life I was going to build here at Pine Ridge. My thoughts kept circling back to the present moment, to the eerie stillness of the forest around me. It was then that I noticed the smell. At first, just a faint whiff, something earthy and slightly sweet. But as I walked, it grew stronger. It reminded me of decaying leaves and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. The scent seemed to cling to the back of my throat, making me want to gag. I quickened my pace, suddenly eager to find a clearing, somewhere open where I could catch my breath and clear my head. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the heart of the forest. The trees here were ancient, their trunks wider than my arm span. The canopy above was so thick that little light penetrated, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. And then, just as I was about to give up and turn back, the path opened up into a small clearing. I stumbled into the open space, relieved to see the sky above me. But my relief was short-lived. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, gnarled oak tree. Its branches reached out like grasping fingers, and its trunk was twisted into shapes that seemed almost faces. Dozens of them, mouths frozen in silent screams. Those stood there rooted to the spot, my heart pounding in my chest. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. I needed to leave to get back to my cabin, to civilization. I turned to go, but as I did, a twig snapped somewhere in the forest behind me. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. Slowly, I turned back toward the sound, and that's when I saw it. A massive and misshapen shadow moving just beyond the tree line. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that I was no longer alone in these woods. And whatever was out there, it wasn't human. Time seemed to stand still as I stared at the spot where I'd seen the shadow. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. It could have been a bear, I told myself, or maybe a deer. Something normal, something that belonged in these woods. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. The shape I'd seen had been too large, too wrong. It moved with a fluidity that no natural creature should possess. I stood there, frozen in indecision. Should I run, try to hide, call out? Each option seemed worse than the last. Running might trigger a chase response. Hiding meant staying in these woods longer. And calling out, well, I wasn't sure I wanted to attract the attention of whatever was out there. As I debated, the decision was made for me. A low guttural sound emerged from the forest. A noise that was neither growl nor roar, but something in between. It resonated in my chest, setting my teeth on edge and sending shivers down my spine. And then it stepped into the clearing. The creature, for I had no other word to describe it, stood at least 7 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, a patchwork of colors that seemed to shift and change as it moved. But it wasn't the size of the fur that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the roundness of its proportion. Its limbs were too long, jointed in places where joints shouldn't be. The torso was gaunt, almost skeletal, with ribs clearly visible beneath the patchy fur. And its face, God, its face. It was a nightmare blend of human and animal features. Eyes too large and too knowing for any beast, set in an elongated face that ended in a snout filled with jagged teeth. Those eyes fixed on me, and I saw something in them that turned my blood to ice. Intelligence. This wasn't some mindless animal. There was a cruel, calculating awareness in that gaze. For a long moment we stood there, locked in a silent standoff. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body refused to move. I was trapped in the creature's gaze, like a rabbit before a wolf. Then, slowly, it began to move towards me. Each step was deliberate, measured. It cocked its head to the side, studying me with an almost curious expression. A long, thin tongue flicked out, tasting the air. I managed to take a step back, then another. My heel caught on a root, and I stumbled, nearly falling. That small movement seemed to break the spell. The creature's posture changed, muscles bunching beneath its fur. It let out another of those bone-chilling sounds, and I knew with certainty that the hunt was on. I turned and ran. When I crashed through the underbrush, all thoughts of following the trail forgotten. Branches whipped at my face, thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't slow down. Behind me I could hear the creature giving chase, its movements almost silent despite its size. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but terror kept me moving. I heard old fallen logs splash through a shallow stream, always aware of the presence behind me. It was toying with me, I realized. If it wanted to, it could have overtaken me already. Just as I thought my legs would give out, I burst out of the trade line. The cabin lay just ahead, a beacon of safety in the gathering dusk. I sprinted across the open ground, fumbling for my keys as I ran. I reached the door, my shaking hands struggling to unlock it. Just as I heard the creature burst from the woods behind me, the key turned. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and throwing the deadbolt. For a moment, all I could do was stand there, gasping for breath. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Then came the scratch at the door, a slow, deliberate sound that sent fresh waves of terror through me. I stumbled to my bedroom, grabbing the hunting rifle I kept under the bed. I've never been much of a hunter, but right now that rifle was the only thing standing between me and whatever was outside. As night fell, the scratching continued, moving from the door to the windows, circling the cabin like a shark circling its prey. I stayed awake all night, rifle in hand, jumping at every sound. By morning, the scratching had stopped, but as I looked out the window at the peaceful forest beyond, I knew one thing for certain: my nightmare was far from over. It was out there waiting, and sooner or later I would have to face it again. The sun rose on a world that seemed unchanged, mocking the terror of the previous night. Clouds chirped cheerfully outside my window, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. It all seemed so normal, so peaceful, that for a moment I wondered if I had dreamed the whole thing. But the scratches on my door and windowsills told a different story, as did the state of my clothes, torn and muddy from my frantic run through the forest. No, it hadn't been a dream. The creature was real, and it was out there somewhere. I spent the morning in a daze, going through the motions of my daily routine while my mind raced. Should I tell someone? Would anyone even believe me? I could barely believe it myself, and I had seen the thing with my own eyes. Around midday, I finally worked up the courage to step outside. The forest looked the same as it always had, green and inviting, but now I knew what lurked within its depths. Now I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I examined the area around my cabin, looking for tracks or any sign of the creature's presence. There were a few broken branches and what might have been large footprints in a patch of soft earth, but nothing conclusive. Nothing that would prove to anyone else that what I had seen was real. As the day wore on, doubt began to creep in. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? Could it have been some kind of hallucination brought on by stress or exhaustion? The more I thought about it, the less sure I became. That evening, driven by a need for human contact and maybe a bit of liquid courage, I decided to head into town. The local bar, the Rusty Nail, was busy for a weeknight. As I nursed my beer, I couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation around me. "Did you hear about the Tanner boy? Says he saw something in the woods last week. Big as a bear, but walking on two legs. Ah, their kid's always making up stories. Probably just saw a shadow and let his imagination run wild. I don't know. My grandpa used to tell stories about something living in those woods. Said it wasn't natural. I listened, my heart racing, so I wasn't the only one. Others had seen something too. But from the dismissive tone of most of the patrons, it was clear that these stories weren't taken seriously. As I was about to leave, an old man at the end of the bar caught my eye. He was watching me intently, his rheumy eyes sharp beneath bushy white brows. As I passed him, he reached out and grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "You seen it, haven't you, boy?" he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "The thing in the woods." I hesitated, then nodded slowly. He released my arm and took a long pull from his drink. "Thought so. Got that look about you, the look of a man who's seen something he can't explain." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The old man shrugged. "Nobody knows for sure. Been stories about it for generations. Some say it's a spirit. Others think it's some kind of undiscovered animal. Me, I think it's something else entirely. Something that don't rightly belong in this world." He leaned in closer, his breath sour with alcohol. "Word of advice, son. You forget what you saw. Forget it and get out of Pine Ridge while you still can. Them woods, they have a way of keeping people, and not always in one piece." With that ominous warning, he turned back to his drink, effectively dismissing me. I left the bar, my mind reeling. Part of me wanted to follow the old man's advice to pack up and leave Pine Ridge behind, but another part, a part I didn't quite understand, knew that I couldn't leave. Not yet, but until I understood what was out there in those woods. As I walked on in the gathering darkness, the forest loomed beside me, a wall of impenetrable shadow. And somewhere in those shadows, I knew something was watching, waiting. My encounter in the woods had left me shaken, but it had also awakened something in me, a need to know, to understand. I couldn't simply run away, not without answers. Little did I know my determination to uncover the truth would lead me down a path far darker and more dangerous than I could have ever imagined. The next few days passed in a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of the woods outside set my heart racing. I jumped at shadows and found myself constantly looking over my shoulder. The creature hadn't returned, but its presence lingered like a bad dream, coloring every moment of my waking life. Unable to shake the memory of what I'd seen, I decided to do some research. If others had encountered this thing before, there had to be some record of it. I started with the local library, a small, quaint building that smelled of old books and dust. The librarian, a kind-faced woman in her 60s named Mrs. Holloway, seemed surprised when I asked about local legends and folklore. "It's not often we get folks interested in the old stories," she said, leading me to a section at the back of the library, especially non-newcomers. She pulled out a few books for me, collections of local tales, a history of Pine Ridge, and a worn journal that she handled with particular care. "This one's special," she said, handing me the journal. It belonged to one of the town's founders. A lot of strange things in there, if you believe in that sort of thing. I thanked her and settled into a quiet corner to begin my research. The history book was fairly standard, detailing the town's founding in the late 1800s and its subsequent development. But scattered throughout were odd references to forest incidents and unexplained disappearances. These were usually glossed over, treated as footnotes to the town's larger narrative. The folklore collections were more promising. They were filled with tales of strange creatures in the woods. Some described as large hairy beasts, others as more ghostly apparitions. None quite matched what I had seen, but there were enough similarities to make me uneasy. It was the farmer's journal, however, that truly captured my attention. The journal belonged to a man named Jeremiah Blackwood, one of the first settlers in the area. His early entries were mundane, detailing the challenges of establishing a new settlement. But as I read on, the tone changed. Blackwood wrote of strange noises at night, of livestock going missing, of settlers venturing into the woods and never returning. He described glimpses of something in the forest, something that moved in ways no natural creature should. The descriptions were vague but chillingly familiar. One entry, dated November 15th, 1872, stood out. I have seen it. God help me, I have seen it with my own eyes. It is not a bear, no wolf, nor any creature known to man. It walks on two legs, yet moves with an inhuman grace. Its eyes hold an intelligence that chills me to my very soul. We cannot stay here. This land is not meant for us. The entry ended there. The rest of the page was torn out. The following pages were filled with increasingly frantic writings, plans to abandon the settlement, warnings to others to stay away. But the final entry, written in a shaky hand, simply read, "They won't let us leave." I closed the journal, my hands trembling. Blackwood's account was over 150 years old, yet it could have been describing my own encounter. Whatever this thing was, it had been here long before Pine Ridge was founded, and it was still here. As I was about to leave, Mrs. Holloway approached me. "I thought you were looking for?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She glanced around, then leaned in close. "Be careful with those old stories," she said. "Some folks around here don't like them being dug up. So it's best to let sleeping dogs lie, if you know what I mean." I thanked her and left, my mind reeling. The warning in her voice was clear, but it only strengthened my resolve. There was more to this town, more to these woods than met the eye, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. As I walked home, the forest seemed to loom larger than ever. Its shadows were deeper, its secrets more ominous. I couldn't shake the feeling that by delving into these old tales, I had set something in motion, something that couldn't be stopped. Little did I know my research had not gone unnoticed, and there were those in Pine Ridge who would go to great lengths to keep the town's secrets buried. A week passed, and life in Pine Ridge took on a surreal quality. On the surface, everything seemed normal. I went about my daily routines, exchanged pleasantries with neighbors, and tried to convince myself that I was settling into small-town life. But underneath it all, a current of fear and unease ran through every moment. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd read in Jeremiah Blackwood's journal. The similarities between his account and my own experience were too striking to ignore. And the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Why hadn't the town's history books mentioned any of this? Why did it seem like everyone in Pine Ridge was determined to pretend that nothing was wrong? I began to pay closer attention to the people around me. I noticed the way conversations would stop abruptly when I approached. The wary glances cast in my direction. It was subtle, but unmistakable. The townspeople knew something, and they didn't want outsiders like me digging too deep. One evening, as I was walking home from the grocery store, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find myself face to face with the old man from the bar, the one who had warned me to leave town. Up close, I could see the web of wrinkles on his weathered face, the cloudy cataracts in his eyes. But those eyes were sharp, alert, boring into me with an intensity that made me take a step back. "You didn't listen to me, did you, boy?" he said, his voice a low growl. "I told you to forget what you saw, to leave while you still could." I stammered, caught off guard by his sudden appearance and accusatory tone. I don't know what you're talking about." He snorted, a sound of disgust. "Don't play dumb with me. I've seen you at the library nosing around in old books asking questions you shouldn't be asking." I felt a chill run down my spine. How did he know about my research? Had he been following me? The old man leaned in closer, his breath sour in my face. Listen to me and listen good. There are things in these woods that ain't meant to be understood. Things that have been here long before us and will be here long after we're gone. You go poking around trying to uncover secrets and you'll bring something down on this town that none of us can stop. I found my voice, anger overriding my fear. People have a right to know if there's something dangerous out there. If people are getting hurt, he cut me off with a harsh laugh. Hurt? Boy, you don't know the half of it. This thing, whatever it is, it doesn't just hurt people. It takes them, changes them. And once it's got its hooks in you, there's no escape. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for someone his age. I'm giving you one last warning. Pack your bags and leave Pine Ridge tonight, because if you're still here tomorrow, I can't guarantee your safety. And I don't just mean from what's in the woods. With that, he released me and shuffled away, leaving me standing there in shock. His words echoed in my mind, each one adding to the weight of dread settling in my stomach. That wasn't just a warning he'd given me, it was a threat. As I hurried home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle in the bushes made me jump. By the time I reached my cabin, I was in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. I locked the door behind me and sank into a chair, my mind racing. The old man's warning had confirmed my worst fears. There was something terrible in these woods, something that townspeople knew about but refused to acknowledge. And nailed by asking questions and digging into the past, I had made myself a target. Part of me wanted to follow the old man's advice, to pack up my meager belongings and flee Pine Ridge, never looking back. But another part, a stronger part, knew that I couldn't leave. Not now, not when I was so close to uncovering the truth. As night fell, I sat by the window, staring out at the dark line of trees. Somewhere out there, the creature was waiting. And in town, there were people who would go to any lengths to keep their secrets buried. I was trapped between two dangers, with nowhere to run. All I could do was prepare for whatever came next, and hope that I was strong enough to face it. Little did I know the true test of my strength was yet to come, and it would challenge not just my body, but my very sanity. The next few days passed in a haze of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to harbor a threat. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see either the old man from town or the creature from the woods looming behind me. Despite the warnings and the growing sense of danger, I couldn't bring myself to leave Pine Ridge. The mystery had its hooks in me too deep. I needed answers, even if those answers put me at risk. I continued my research, but more discreetly now. Instead of going to the library, I ordered books online and had them delivered to my cabin. I scoured internet forums for any mention of similar creatures or unexplained events in the area. Most of what I found was clearly fiction or the ramblings of conspiracy theorists. But every now and then I come across something that rang true, that matched what I had experienced. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I heard it, a sound so faint I almost thought I'd imagined it. A scratching at my door. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then it came again, louder this time, unmistakable. I grabbed the rifle I now kept close at hand and approached the door slowly. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The scratching continued, interspersed with a low, guttural sound that was neither human nor animal. With shaking hands, I reached for the doorknob. I knew it was foolish, knew I should run or hide or call for help. But some part of me, some primal instinct, told me that this moment was inevitable. That sooner or later I would have to face what was out there. I threw the door open, raising the rifle. But it wasn't the creature standing there. It was a man, or at least it had been a man once. He stood hunched over, his clothes torn and dirty, His skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over a frame that seemed too long, too thin to be human. And his eyes were black, pupilless, staring at me with a hunger that turned my blood to ice. "Help me," she rasped, his voice a broken whisper. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. The man thing took a step forward. In the dim light, I could see that his fingers were elongated, ending in sharp points. His mouth opened in a silent scream, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. I raised the rifle, my finger tightening on the trigger, but I couldn't do it. Whatever this thing was, it had once been human, and some part of it still was. "What happened to you?" I managed to ask, my voice shaking. The creature cocked its head as if struggling to understand. Then, in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together, it spoke. "The forest. It changes you, makes you like it." A chill ran down my spine. The forest. Not a creature in the forest, but the forest itself. Somehow, impossibly, the land itself was alive, conscious, and it was transforming people, turning them into this. The realization hit me like a physical blow. That's why the townspeople were so secretive, so eager to keep outsiders away. They weren't just protecting themselves from a monster, they were protecting the outside world from becoming monsters. As I stood there, grappling with this horrifying revelation, the creature lunged at me. I fired the rifle on instinct, the shot deafening in the confined space of my cabin. The creature stumbled back, black ether oozing from a wound in its chest, but it didn't fall. Instead, it looked at me with those terrible black eyes, and I saw something there that chilled me to my core. Recognition, intelligence, and a hunger that would never be satisfied. I slammed the door shut and threw the bolt, then ran to the back of the cabin. I could hear the creature outside, circling, scratching at the walls, searching for a way in. As I huddled there, rifle clutched to my chest, I knew everything had changed. The truth I had been seeking was far worse than anything I could have imagined. And now that I knew it, I could never unknow. Never go back to a normal life. The forest was alive and it was hungry. And I was trapped here at its mercy. As the night wore on and the sounds outside grew louder and more numerous, I realized my ordeal was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold that seemed obscene given the horrors of the night. The creature, or creatures, for I had heard multiple voices in the darkness, eventually retreated, leaving behind only scratches on the walls and a pervasive sense of dread. I hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. My mind was a whirlwind of terrifying realizations and half-formed plans. The truth I had uncovered was beyond anything I could have imagined, and it left me with an impossible choice. I could run, try to escape Pine Ridge and its living forest, but even if I managed to get away, could I live with myself knowing I had left others to this fate? What if the forest's influence spread beyond the town's borders? Long before nowhere was safe. Or I could stay and fight. And fight what? How does one combat a sentient landscape, a force of nature that had existed for who knows how long? As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I made my decision. I couldn't run. Whatever the cost, I had to try to stop this. I spent the morning gathering supplies, food, water, my rifle, and anything else I thought might be useful. Then, stealing my nerves, I set out into town. I needed allies if I was going to have any chance of succeeding. The streets were eerily quiet as I made my way to the center of Pine Ridge. Hayes watched me from behind curtains, doors closed as I approached. The secret was out and the town knew it. I found myself in front of the town hall, a stately old building that had probably once been the pride of Pine Ridge. Now it just looked tired, worn down by the weight of secrets it held. I pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The group of people were gathered in the main hall. The mayor, the sheriff, Mrs. Holloway from the library, and several others I recognized as prominent town members. They all turned to look at me as I entered. Their faces a mix of fear, resignation, and something that might have been relief. "Sire," the mayor said, breaking the tense silence. I nodded, my throat tight. The forest is alive and it's changing people. A ripple went through the group. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward, her kind face lined with sorrow. "We try to warn you to keep you away from all this, but once the forest takes an interest in someone," she trailed off, shaking her head. "How long?" I asked. "How long has this been happening?" The sheriff, a burly man with a gray-streaked beard, answered. "As far as we can tell, since before the town was founded, maybe even before people ever came to this land. And they've just been living with it, letting it take people." I couldn't keep the accusation out of my voice. The mayor sighed, suddenly looking very old. "What choice did we have? We tried fighting it long ago. We lost so many lives." He shook his head. "So we made a deal. We keep people away, keep the secret, and it limits itself. Only takes a few now and then." I felt sick. "And that's supposed to make it okay?" "No," Mrs. Holloway said softly. "It's not okay. It will never be okay. But it's how we've survived." I looked around at their faces, tired, haunted, but with a glimmer of something I hadn't expected. Hope. "You've been waiting for someone like me," I realized. Someone from outside who could see the truth, who might be able to do something about it. The sheriff nodded. "We can't fight it ourselves. We're too much a part of it now. But you're new, untouched. You might have a chance. But I don't know how," I said. The weight of their expectations crushing down on me. I don't even know what it is, let alone how to stop it. Mrs. Holloway stepped forward, pressing a book into my hands. It was old, its leather cover cracked and faded. "This might help. It's a record kept by those who came before us, who tried to understand the forest. We've added to it over the years, but we could never make sense of it all." I opened the book with trembling hands. Its pages were filled with diagrams, notes, and what looked like incantations in a language I didn't recognize. "You think this can stop the forest?" I asked. The mayor shook his head. "Stop it? No, I don't think anything can stop it entirely. But maybe we can bind it, contain it, keep it from spreading further." I looked down at the book, then back at the group. Their faces were filled with a desperate hope that I wasn't sure I could live up to. But I knew I had to try. "All right," I said, squaring my shoulders. "Tell me everything you know. We've got work to do." As we gathered around a large table spreading out maps and ancient texts, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were embarking on something monumental, something that would either save Pine Ridge or doom us all. As we pored over the ancient texts and pieced together a plan, I realized that my life had irrevocably changed. There was no going back to the person I was before coming to Pine Ridge. The knowledge I now possessed, the responsibility that had been thrust upon me, would shape the rest of my days. Our plan was dangerous, bordering on insane. Using a combination of rituals described in the old book and modern technology, we aimed to create a barrier around the forest, a metaphysical cage that would contain its influence. It would require a group of us to venture deep into the heart of the woods, to the source of its power, while others maintained a perimeter, ready to complete the ritual from the outside. As dawn broke on the day of our attempt, I stood at the edge of the forest, my heart pounding. The group that would accompany me into the woods, the sheriff, Mrs. Holloway, and 2 others who had volunteered, gathered around. Their faces were grim but determined. "Remember," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "No matter what happens, no matter what we see or hear, we have to reach the center. Everything depends on it." They nodded, and without another word, we plunged into the forest. The woods seemed to close in around us immediately. The air grew thick and oppressive, filled with whispers just beyond the edge of hearing. Shadows moved in impossible ways, and more than once I caught glimpses of twisted, inhuman shapes flitting between the trees. As we pushed deeper, the forest resistance grew stronger. Roots rose to trip us. Branches lashed out like whips. The whispers grew louder, becoming voices that called to us by name, begging us to turn back, to give in, to become one with the forest. One by one, our group began to falter. The sheriff was the first to fall, his mind overcome by the forest's influence. I had to leave him behind, his screams echoing through the trees as we pressed on. Mrs. Holloway was next, her kind face contorting into something inhuman before she ran off into the shadows. The others followed until only I remained, stumbling forward on sheer willpower alone. Finally, after what felt like hours or days, time had lost all meaning in this place. I reached the heart of the forest. It was a massive, ancient tree, its trunk wider than a house, its branches reaching up to blot out the sky. The air around it pulsed with malevolent energy. With trembling hands, I began the ritual. The words felt heavy on my tongue, each syllable a struggle against the forest's will. As I spoke, the tree began to writhe, its bark splitting to reveal a maw filled with countless teeth. I felt my mind begin to slip, the forest's influence seeping into my thoughts. But I forced myself to continue, drawing on every ounce of strength I had left. As I spoke the final words, a blinding light erupted from the ground, shooting up into the sky. The forest screamed, the sound of rage and pain that shook the very earth. And then silence. I awoke days later in Pine Ridge Hospital. The mayor was there, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes bright with hope. "It worked," he said simply. "The forest. It's contained and we can feel it. It's still there, still alive, but it can't reach beyond its borders anymore." The cost had been high. Many of those who had ventured into the forest with me were lost, either dead or transformed beyond recognition. The town would bear the scars of this battle for generations to come, but we had won. We had faced an ancient, unknowable evil and emerged victorious. As I recovered, I knew that my work wasn't done. The forest was contained, but not destroyed. It would need to be watched, studied, and understood. And I would dedicate my life to ensuring that what happened in Pine Ridge would never happen again. The fresh start I had sought when I came to this town hadn't been what I expected. And as I looked out the hospital window at the line of trees in the distance, no longer menacing but still holding their secrets, I realized that I had found my purpose. The forest had changed me just as it had changed so many others. But unlike those poor souls lost to its influence, I had changed on my own terms. I was no longer running from my past, but facing a future filled with purpose and responsibility. Pine Ridge would rebuild, it would heal, and I would be there every step of the way, a guardian against the darkness that had nearly consumed us all. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The nightmare was over, a new day had dawned, and whatever challenges the future held, I was ready to face them. My name is Zach Hurley, and I've seen things in these woods that would make most people question their sanity. Well, what happened in 2014 deep in the heart of North Cascades National Park, Washington, still haunts me to this day. I've been a search and rescue officer for the U.S. Forest Service for almost 15 years. Usually it's a pretty straightforward job. Lost hikers, sprained ankles, maybe a dramatic cliffside rescue now and then, but nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to face. It was a dreary Tuesday in late October, the kind of day where the mist hangs low, clinging to the evergreens like a shroud. I just wrapped up a long shift and was looking forward to heading home, maybe catching the tail end of the Seahawks game. That's when the radio crackled to life. "Zach, you copy. We've got a situation out near Thornton Lake. Some campers reported hearing strange noises. They sound pretty spooked." I sighed, reaching for the radio. "Copy that dispatch. What kind of noises are we talking about?" There was a pause. Then Not sure. They're not making much sense. Keep saying something about breathing that shook the ground. Probably just a bear, but better check it out. Let's head for aim on my way. As I gathered my gear and headed out, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a routine call. Something in the dispatcher's voice, a hint of uncertainty, set my nerves on edge. But I brushed it off. After all, what could be out there that I hadn't seen before? The drive to Thornton Lake took longer than usual. The fog had thickened, reducing visibility to barely a car length ahead. By the time I reached the trailhead, dusk was settling in, painting the world in shades of gray and deepening shadows. I grabbed my pack, flashlight, and radio, then set off down the trail. The usual sounds of the forest, birds calling, small animals scurrying through the underbrush, were oddly absent. An eerie silence had descended, broken only by the soft crunch of my boots on the damp earth. As I neared the campsite, a sense of unease crept over me. The air felt heavy, charged with a tension I couldn't explain. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was unlike anything I'd ever encountered in these woods. My hand instinctively went to the hunting knife in my belt as I pushed forward. Whatever was out there, I had a job to do. Little did I know, this night would change everything I thought I knew about the world and the creatures that inhabit it. The campsite came into view, a small clearing nestled among towering Douglas firs. Two figures stood huddled by a tent, their postures tense and alert. As I approached, they whirled to face me, relief flooding their features. "Thank God you're here," the woman said, her voice trembling. "We've been hearing things." I introduced myself and tried to put them at ease. "I'm Zach Hurley, search and rescue. Can you tell me exactly what you heard?" The man who introduced himself as Ryan spoke up. "It started early this morning. We were asleep, and suddenly there was this breathing. But not like any animal I've ever heard. It was deep, powerful. The ground actually shook." His partner Megan nodded vigorously. "We thought it was a bear at first, but it circled the tent for hours. Whatever it was huge." I listened carefully, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Did you see anything?" They exchanged glances. "No," Ryan said finally. "We were too scared to look outside, but we could hear it moving, branches snapping, and there was this smell." "Smell?" I prompted. Megan wrinkled her nose. "Like rotting meat and wet earth." "It was awful." I nodded, making mental notes. "All right, I'm gonna take a look around. You two stay here, okay? We'll be back soon." As I moved away from the campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest seemed to press in around me, the shadows deepened with each step. About 50 yards from the camp, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Tracks. But not like any I'd seen before. They were massive, easily twice the size of a grizzly's paw print, but the shape was all wrong, too elongated with what looked like claw marks at the edges. In the pattern, it was almost like whatever made them was walking on two legs, not four. I crouched down, studying the impressions. They were fresh, the edges still sharp in the damp earth. Whatever had made them couldn't be far. That's when I heard it again, that deep, rumbling breath. It was closer now and unmistakably real. I slowly stood, my hand going to my radio, but before I could call it in, a scream shattered the silence. It came from the direction of the camp. I sprinted back, my heart pounding in my ears. As I burst into the clearing, I was met with a sight that defied explanation. The tent was in tatters, camping gear strewn everywhere, and Ryan and Megan were gone. "Ryan! Megan!" I shouted, scanning the area frantically. But there was no response, just an oppressive silence that seemed to mock my calls. That's when I saw it, a massive shadow moving between the trees. It was like nothing I'd ever encountered before. Hulking and low to the ground, it moved with a fluid grace that belied its size. As it passed through a shaft of fading sunlight, I caught a glimpse of its body covered in what looked like mud-caked scales, rough and uneven. Then it turned its head towards me, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. Its face was a nightmare made flesh, a wide elongated maw filled with blunt, almost human-like teeth. Eyes that glowed with an unnatural intelligence fixed on me. And I knew in that moment that I was no longer the predator in these woods. I was the prey. Time seemed to stand still as I faced the creature, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. It was like something out of a prehistoric nightmare, part reptile, part something else entirely. Its eyes, intelligent and predatory, locked onto mine, and I felt a primal fear unlike anything I had experienced before. The creature let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the clearing. I knew I had mere seconds before it attacked. My training kicked in and I slowly began to back away, never breaking eye contact. Easy now, I murmured, more to calm myself than the beast. Let's not do anything hasty. As if in response, the creature's muscles tensed, preparing to spring. I had my knife out in an instant, the small blade feeling woefully inadequate against this monstrous opponent. That was all I had. The attack came with frightening speed. One moment the creature was crouched, the next it was airborne. Crossing the distance between us in a single bound, I dove to the side, feeling the rush of air as it passed inches from me. I rolled, coming up in a defensive crouch, knife at the ready. The beast skidded, its claws tearing up the forest floor as it turned for another pass. This time I stood my ground. As it lunged, I swung the knife in a wide arc, feeling a moment of resistance as the blade connected with its hide. A piercing shriek filled the air, more enraged than pain. The creature recoiled, giving me a split second to assess the damage. I barely scratched it. The scowls seemed to act like natural armor, deflecting most of the blow, and I knew I was outmatched. My only hope was to make it back to my vehicle and call for backup. But as I turned to run, I realized with growing horror that I'd lost my bearings in the chaos. The fog had thickened, obscuring the trail. I was lost. The sound of heavy breathing behind me spurred me into action. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face as I ran blindly through the forest. The creature pursued, its massive form somehow moving silently through the trees. My lungs burned, my legs screaming for rest, but I pushed on. The fog seemed to part for a moment, and I caught sight of a rocky outcropping ahead. If I could reach higher ground, maybe I could get my bearings. I scrambled up the rocks, my hands finding purchase on the slick surface. As I pulled myself to the top, I heard a frustrated roar from below. The creature paced at the base of the outcropping, its claws scraping against the stone as it searched for a way up. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. But as I looked out over the misty forest, my heart sank. There was no sign of the trail, no familiar landmarks. I was well and truly lost. The radio at my belt crackled to life, making me jump. "Zach, come in," it said. "What's your status?" I grabbed for it, my head shaking. "Dispatch, this is Zach. I've got a situation here. The campers are missing and there's something out here. I need immediate backup." "Say again, Zach." "You're breaking up." "Did you say the campers are missing?" Before I could respond, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the forest. It was human, filled with terror and pain, and it was close. I looked down to see the creature had given up trying to reach me. Instead, it was moving off into the mist, towards the source of the scream. I had a choice to make: stay safe on my perch or go after it and try to save whoever was out there. But really, there was no choice at all. With a deep breath, I began to climb down. The hunt was on. At this time, I was the hunter. The descent from the rocky outcropping was treacherous. stones slick with moss and the ever-present moisture of the Pacific Northwest. Every movement had to be calculated. My focus split between finding secure handholds and straining my ears for any sound of the creature or its potential victim. As my feet touched the forest floor, another scream pierced the air closer this time. I oriented myself towards the sound and began to move. My steps careful and measured despite the urgency coursing through me. The fog had thickened even further, reducing visibility to mere feet in front of me. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I tried the radio again, but all I got was static. Whether it was the terrain or something more sinister interfering with the signal, I was on my own. The forest seemed to close in around me as I pressed forward. The familiar scents of pine and damp earth were overshadowed by something else, a rank musky odor that grew stronger with each step. It was the smell Megan had described, like rotting meat and wet soil. I was on the right track. The branch snapped somewhere to my left and I froze. Slowly I turned my head, straining to see through the mist. For a moment there was nothing. Then a shape began to materialize. Tall, bipedal, but unmistakably inhuman. I held my breath, willing my heart to quiet its frantic beating. The shape moved, and for a split second I caught a glimpse of those terrifying eyes glowing with an inner light that had no place in nature. It hadn't seen me. Small mercies. I watched as it moved away, its gait a strange mix of grace and raw power. Once I was sure it was gone, I let out a shaky breath and continued on, now moving parallel to the creature's path. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I came across a small clearing. The fog was thinner here, and what I saw made my blood run cold. In the center of the clearing was a crude structure, something between a nest and a lair. It was constructed of broken branches, leaves, and other things that glinted white in the dim light, bones. As I approached, the smell became overwhelming. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, fighting the urge to gag. That's when I saw them. Ryan and Megan, or what was left of them. They were sprawled at the edge of the nest, their bodies twisted at unnatural angles. I'd seen my share of animal attacks over the years, but this was something else entirely. I knelt beside them, checking for any signs of life, but I knew it was futile. They were gone. The sound from the other side of the clearing snapped me back to alertness. Someone was moving through the underbrush, heading this way. I ducked behind the nest, my hand on my knife as a figure emerged from the mist, a young woman, her clothes torn and dirty, her eyes wide with fear. She stumbled into the clearing, then stopped short when she saw the grisly scene before her. I stood slowly, my hands raised. "It's okay," I said softly. "I'm here to help." She whirled to face me, her body tensing as if to run. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice hoarse. "My name is Zach Hurley. I'm with Search and Rescue." "What's your name?" She hesitated, then seemed to deflate slightly. Lena Carver. I was hiking and got lost, and then I saw. She trailed off, her eyes darting around the clearing. "I know," I said. "I've seen it too. We need to get out of here, Lena. It's not safe." As if summoned by my words, a roar echoed through the forest, closer than ever. Lena's eyes widened in terror. "It's coming back," she whispered. I grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the edge of the clearing. "Run," I said. Now, as we plunged back into the misty forest, I could hear the creature crashing through the underbrush behind us. The hunt had taken a new turn, and now it was a race for survival. We ran blindly through the fog-shrouded forest, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us with every step. Lena stumbled, and I caught her arm, pulling her along. The sound of pursuit was ever present. The creature's roars grew closer with each passing moment. "There," Lena gasped, pointing ahead. Through the mist I could make out the dark mouth of a cave set into a hillside. It wasn't ideal, but it was our best chance. We dove into the cave just as a massive shape burst from the tree line behind us. I pushed Lana farther into the darkness, and then turned to face the entrance, knife at the ready. The creature's bulk filled the cave mouth, its glowing eyes fixed on us, its snarled mouth revealing those unnaturally human-like teeth. But it didn't enter. Instead, it paced back and forth as if reluctant to follow us into the confined space. For long moments we stood in a tense standoff, then slowly the creature backed away, disappearing into the mist. But I knew it wouldn't go far. We were trapped. As the adrenaline began to fade, the reality of our situation set in. I turned to Lena, who had slumped against the cave wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Are you hurt?" I asked, kneeling beside her. She shook her head. "Just scratches." "What? What was that thing?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know. I've never seen anything like it." "I have," Lena said quietly. I looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" She met my gaze. Her eyes were haunted. "I'm not just a hiker, I'm a biologist. I was out here collecting samples for a research project when I stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see. My mind raced, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. "Tell me everything," I said. Lena took a deep breath. "About a mile from here, there's a facility. It's not on any maps and it's heavily guarded. I thought it was just some government research station, but I think it's where that thing came from." "What makes you say that?" 2 days ago I was taking samples near the perimeter. I heard alarms going off, people shouting. Then I saw it, that creature bursting through a fence like it was tissue paper. It was being chased by men in hazmat suits, but it was too fast. It disappeared into the forest. I absorbed this information, a cold dread settling in my stomach. "You're saying this thing is some kind of experiment?" Lena nodded. "I think so. I've heard rumors about a project called Komakai, supposedly a genetic engineering program aimed at creating hybrid creatures that could adapt to extreme environments. But I never imagined." I shook my head, trying to process this revelation. "So we're dealing with a genetically engineered monster. Great. Any ideas on how to stop it?" Lena shrugged helplessly. "Not sure. Its hide seems incredibly tough and it's clearly intelligent. Maybe if we could lure it back to the facility." A roar from outside cut off her words. The creature was getting impatient. "We need to move," I said, peering out of the cave entrance. "It's distracted. If we're quiet, we might be able to slip past it." Lena nodded, her face pale but determined. We crept to the cave mouth, every sense on high alert. The creature was pacing at the edge of the clearing. Its back was to us. This was our chance. We slipped out of the cave, staying low and moving as silently as possible. I made it about halfway across the clearing when a twig snapped under my foot. The creature whirled, its eyes locking onto us. For a heartbeat, time seemed to stand still, and it charged. "Run!" I yelled, pushing Lena ahead of me. We sprinted for the tree line, the sound of pursuit thundering behind us. As we crashed through the underbrush, I caught glimpses of unnatural movement in the forest around us. More than one set of glowing eyes peered from the shadows. With a sinking feeling, I realized we weren't dealing with just one escaped experiment. The hunt was far from over. The forest blurred around us as we ran, the sounds of pursuit echoing from all sides. It was clear now that we were being herded, driven in a specific direction by multiple creatures, but we had no choice but to keep moving. Lena gasped, pointing ahead. Through the thinning trees, I could make out the outline of a large concrete structure. High fences topped with barbed wire surrounded it, and floodlights cut through the mist. The facility. As we approached, alarms began to blare. Figures in hazmat suits and armed guards poured out of the building, shouting and gesturing wildly.
"Stop right there,"
A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. This is a restricted area. I grabbed Lenia's arm, pulling her to a stop. We need help, I shouted. There are creatures out here. For a moment there was silence, save for the wailing alarms. Then the voice spoke again, tension evident even through the distortion of the speakers. How many of you are there? Just us two, I replied. Please let us in. Those things are right behind us. Another pause, then the sound of the gate buzzing open. Come in quickly, the voice ordered. We didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted through the gate, which clanged shut behind us. Armed guards surrounded us immediately, their weapons trained not on us but on the forest beyond. A man in a white lab coat approached, his face a mask of concern and barely concealed fear. I'm Dr. Emerson, he said. You've seen the specimen. Before I could answer, a series of bone-chilling howls rose from the forest. The creatures had arrived. Get them inside, Dr. Emerson barked. Activate the perimeter defenses. We were hustled into the facility as chaos erupted outside. The last thing I saw before the door slammed shut was a massive scaled form leaping over the fence. Inside the facility was a maze of sterile white corridors and laboratories. We were led to a secure room where a team of scientists waited, their faces grim. Tell us everything you saw, Dr. Emerson demanded once the door was sealed. I recounted our encounters with the creature, watching as the scientists exchanged meaningful glances. When I finished, Dr. Emerson sighed heavily. What we're about to tell you is classified at the highest levels, he began. Project Kumokai was intended to create beings capable of surviving in the most extreme environments on Earth and potentially beyond. We used a combination of reptilian, mammalian, and other DNA sources. Other, I asked. I'm not sure I wanted to know the answer. Dr. Emerson hesitated. Let's just say that some of our genetic material came from sources not generally acknowledged by mainstream science. A chill ran down my spine as I processed the implications of his words. We thought we had them contained, he continued, but they proved to be far more intelligent and adaptable than we anticipated. They've been escaping in increasing numbers over the past week. How many are out there? Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Emerson's face was grim. At last count, at least a dozen. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. A dozen genetically engineered predators. Loose in the wilderness, it was a nightmare scenario. Suddenly, the building shook and the lights flickered. Alarms blared anew. They are trying to break in, one of the scientists said, panic evident in his voice. Dr. Emerson moved to a computer terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard. We need to initiate Protocol Omega, he said. It's our only chance to contain this. What's Protocol Omega? I asked, a sense of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. He turned to face us, his expression grave. A fail-safe, a way to eliminate all traces of Project Kumokai, including the specimens. Another impact rocked the building. You could hear roars and the sound of tearing metal. We don't have much time, Dr. Emerson said. We need to get to the control room to activate the protocol, but the specimens are between us and there. I looked at Lena, then back at the scientists. We were trapped in a facility under siege by creatures that defied explanation, with only a desperate plan for salvation. What do you need us to do? I asked, knowing that the next few minutes would determine not just our fate, but potentially that of the entire region. The hunt had become a battle for survival, and we were woefully unprepared for what lay ahead. The facility shuddered again, the sounds of destruction growing closer. Dr. Emerson pulled up a schematic of the building on a nearby monitor. The control room is here, he said, pointing to a location 2 floors up. We need to reach it to activate Protocol Omega, but the specimens are likely to be concentrated in the main corridors. I studied the layout, noting the ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels. What about these? I asked. Could we use them to bypass the main areas? Dr. Emerson nodded approvingly. Good thinking. That'd be tight, but it might be our best chance. We quickly formulated a plan. Dr. Emerson and 2 other scientists would come with us, while the rest would stay behind to coordinate with any remaining security personnel. As we prepared to leave, I turned to Lena. You don't have to come, I said softly. It's not your fight. She met my gaze, her jaw set determinedly. I'm a part of this now. I'm coming. I nodded, respecting her decision. We gathered what supplies we could. Flashlights, a first aid kit, and a couple of shock batons that the facility's security used for containment. The ventilation shaft was cramped and dusty, forcing us to crawl single file through the darkness. The sounds of the creature's rampage echoed through the metal ducts, growing louder as we ascended. We had almost reached our exit point when a massive impact dented the shaft just ahead of us. Claws punctured the metal, and a glowing eye peered in. Back, I hissed. Find another way. We scrambled backward as the creature tore at the duct. Dr. Emerson directed us to a maintenance hatch, and we spilled out into a dimly lit corridor. The stairs are just ahead, he said. If we can reach them. A roar cut him off. At the end of the hallway, a specimen appeared, its massive form filling the space. It wasn't alone. Run! I shouted, pushing the others ahead of me. He sprinted for the stairwell, the creatures in hot pursuit. We burst through the door and started climbing. The sounds of tearing metal and inhuman shrieks followed close behind. As we reached the next floor, one of the scientists stumbled. I turned back to help him, but a scaled arm shot through the gap in the stairs, dragging him down. His screams were abruptly cut off. Keep moving, Dr. Emerson yelled, his face pale with shock. We pressed on, finally reaching the floor with the control room. But as we exited the stairwell, we found ourselves face to face with 3 of the creatures. They were even more terrifying up close. Their bodies were a patchwork of scales, fur, and something that looked almost like living stone. Their eyes gleamed with alien intelligence, and their mouths were filled with those unsettlingly human-like teeth. For a moment, we stood frozen in a Mexican standoff. Then one of the creatures lunged. I swung the shock baton, catching it in the side. Electricity crackled and the beast let out a shriek of pain and rage, but it wasn't enough to stop it. Chaos erupted in the hallway. Lena and the remaining scientists fought desperately with their own batons, while Dr. Emerson frantically worked to override the control room's lock. I found myself grappling with the creature I'd shocked, its claws raking across my chest. Pain blossomed, but adrenaline kept me fighting. I managed to jam the baton into its mouth, holding down the trigger. The smell of ozone and burning flesh filled the air as electricity coursed through the creature. It convulsed, then went limp. "It's open!" Dr. Emerson shouted. We rushed onto the control room, slamming the reinforced door shut just as the remaining creatures threw themselves against it. Dr. Emerson immediately went to work at the main console, his fingers flying over the keys. Warnings flashed across the screens. "What exactly does Protocol Omega do?" I asked, pressing her hands to my bleeding chest. "It releases a specially engineered virus," he explained, not looking up from his work. "Harmless to normal life forms, but fatal to our specimens. It will eliminate all traces of their unique genetic structure." A part of me felt uneasy about such a drastic measure, but I knew we had no choice. The specimens were too dangerous to be allowed to escape into the wider world. "How long will it take?" Lena asked, helping me bandage my wounds with supplies from the first aid kit. "The virus will be released through the ventilation system," Dr. Emerson said. "It should take effect almost immediately," but he trailed off, his expression grim. "But what?" I prompted. "The failsafe is thorough," he said quietly. "Once activated, it will not only eliminate the specimens, but also any genetic material related to them, including..." Understanding dawned, including us. I finished. We've been exposed to them. The virus will affect us too. Dr. Emerson nodded solemnly. I'm sorry. There's no other way to ensure complete containment. The pounding on the door grew more intense. We could hear metal grinding beginning to give way. How long do we have? Linda asked, her voice surprisingly steady. Once I initiate the protocol, maybe 5 minutes. I looked at Lena and then at Dr. Emerson. In their eyes, I saw the same resigned determination I felt. Fluid, I said. Dr. Emerson took a deep breath, then pressed the final sequence of keys. Alarms blared throughout the facility. On the monitors, we could see a green mist beginning to seep from the vents. The pounding on the door suddenly stopped. We listened intently, hearing the sound of heavy bodies falling in the hallway outside. It's working, Dr. Emerson said softly. We gathered in the center of the room, watching as the green mist began to seep under the door. There was nothing left to do but wait. As the mist swirled around our feet, I felt a strange sense of peace. We had stopped something terrible from being unleashed on the world. Whatever the cost, it had been worth it. I reached out and took Lena's hand. She squeezed it gently, sad smile on her face. Thank you, Dr. Emerson said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. As the mist rose around us, my last thoughts were of the forest outside. I hoped it would recover from the nightmare that had been unleashed upon it. And I hoped that someday someone would learn from our mistakes. The green mist enveloped us completely, and the world faded away. Epilogue. 1 year later, the hiker paused at the crest of the hill, wiping sweat from her brow as she surveyed the valley below. The forests of North Cascades National Park stretched out before her, a sea of green under the summer sun. She consulted her map, frowning slightly. According to her GPS, she should be nearing the location of the old research facility, but there was no sign of any structures, just endless trees. As she began her descent into the valley, she noticed something odd. In the clearing ahead, the vegetation seemed different. Younger, as if it had only recently begun to grow. Curious, she made her way to the clearing. As she got closer, she could see the faint outlines of foundations beneath the new growth. This must be where the facility had stood. She had heard rumors, of course, stories of a secret government project gone wrong, of monsters in the woods. But in the years since the supposed incident, no evidence had ever been found. The official story was that an experimental energy project had suffered a containment failure, necessitating a controlled demolition of the facility. And yet, the hiker knelt, running her hand over a patch of strange, iridescent moss that seemed to glow faintly in the shadows. She had never seen anything quite like it before. As she stood, something caught her eye. Half buried in the soft earth was a small metallic object. She carefully brushed away the soil, revealing a battered name tag. Zach Hurley, U.S. Forest Service. A chill ran down her spine despite the warm day. She had read about the missing search and rescue officer in the reports from last year. Suddenly, a sound from the forest made her freeze. It was probably just an animal, she told herself, a deer or maybe a bear. But as the sound came again, a low, rumbling breath that seemed to make the very air vibrate, she knew it was time to leave. The hiker stood quickly, shoving the name tag into her pocket. As she hurried back the way she had come, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Deep in the shadows of the forest, something moved. Eyes that should not exist gleamed with inhuman intelligence. And in the dying light of day, a hunt began anew. My name is Ellis Cartwright, and in 2004 I found myself deep in the uninviting wilderness of Wrangell St. Elias National Park in Alaska. Being stationed in the country's largest national park might sound impressive, but I can tell you right now, there's nothing glamorous about days spent combing dense forests and jagged ice-covered slopes in search of people who usually didn't want to be found. But I've got a soft spot for the park. I've been working here for a solid 7 years, and most of the time I wouldn't trade it for anything. That is until I got a call from dispatch about an odd case, one that had already rattled the quiet community in McCarthy. Two hikers, a couple by the name of Jody and Mark O'Connor, had gone missing after setting out for a backcountry trek. They were experienced hikers, the type who meticulously planned every trip, left detailed itineraries, and always checked in on schedule. But this time, they hadn't shown up, and their families were starting to get frantic. Normally, I'd write it off as bad luck or poor planning. People tend to underestimate how quick this wilderness can turn on you. But there was a catch. They hadn't gone alone. They'd been in the company of a local guide, Sawyer Morgan, who was known to everyone in McCarthy. A rough guy, sure, with a dark sense of humor and a reputation for being a bit reckless. But he knew the land better than most. So when the three of them failed to return and no one had heard a whisper of them for 3 days, it struck a nerve in the tight-knit community. I remember the moment I got the call. It was late evening, and I was sitting in my small cabin on the outskirts of McCarthy, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and going over some paperwork. The radio crackled to life, startling me out of my concentration. "Ellis, you there?" It was Diane from dispatch, her voice tight with worry. "Yeah, I'm here."
"What's up?"
"We've got a situation. The O'Connors and Sawyer Morgan haven't checked in. They're 3 days overdue." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Alaskan cold. "Sawyer's with them. That doesn't sound right." "I know. That's why we're worried. Can you head out first thing tomorrow?" I agreed. My mind was already racing through the possibilities. None of them were good. As I prepared for bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be a routine search and rescue. Something in the pit of my stomach told me we were in for trouble. Little did I know just how right I was. I set out early the next morning, feeling a little more apprehensive than usual. The air was bitter cold, slicing right through the layers I bundled up in. My partner for the day was Mike Hargrave, a grizzled vet of the Park Service with a knack for telling off-color jokes at the worst possible times. He met me at the trailhead, cracking a grin that told me he was in a better mood than I was. "Ellis," he said, "do you ever get the feeling some folks are just begging for trouble? Look at this." He pointed at the tracks leading into the trees, barely visible beneath a fresh dusting of snow. Now that isn't normal. You ever known Sawyer to get himself lost? "No," I replied, trying to shake off the sense of foreboding creeping up on me. I hadn't. Sawyer was a bit of a hotshot, but the man knew his way around this place like it was his own backyard. Something didn't sit right, and as we trudged deeper into the forest, the feeling grew stronger. The trees loomed over us, skeletal and silent. A dense wall of dark green and white that seemed to close in tighter with every step. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of our boots in the snow and our labored breathing. "You know," Mike said after we'd been walking for about an hour, "I'd been thinking about Sawyer. Remember that story he used to tell? About the thing he saw up in the high country?" I nodded, recalling the tale. Sawyer had come back from a solo trip a few years back, wild-eyed and jumpy. He'd spun a yarn about some creature he'd seen. Something that walked on 2 legs but wasn't human. We'd all laughed it off as too much whiskey and too little sleep. But Sawyer had never joined in the laughter. He'd just get this far away, look at his eyes, and change the subject. "You don't think?" I started to say, then shook my head. "No, that's ridiculous," Mike shrugged. "I'm just saying maybe there's more to this place than we know. These mountains, they're old. Who knows what might be hiding in them?" And I was about to tell him to knock it off when something caught my eye. A flash of color against the white snow, just off the trail. I moved closer, my heart sinking as I recognized what it was. It was Jody O'Connor's bright blue scarf snagged on a low-hanging branch. And beside it, barely visible in the snow, was a single boot print. But it wasn't like any print I'd ever seen before. It was huge, easily twice the size of my own boot. And the shape was all wrong. The toes were too long, almost claw-like. I called Mike over and we stood there in silence, staring at the print. Neither of us wanted to say what we were thinking, because if we said it out loud, we have to admit that maybe, just maybe, we were dealing with something we never encountered before. And in the vast, unforgiving wilderness of Alaska, that thought was more terrifying than anything I could imagine. It was mid-afternoon when we stumbled across the first real sign that something was terribly wrong. A scattering of gear, just a water bottle and a torn backpack strap, lay half buried in the snow. Mike picked up the bottle, turning it over in his hands. "Looks like marks," he said quietly. And then, with his trademark humor creeping in, probably a case of a nasty breakup, nothing like a snowstorm to bring out a couple's issues. I didn't laugh. There was a sharpness to the air, something I couldn't quite place. The snow was falling harder now, making it difficult to see too far ahead. Mike and I pressed on, calling their names, hoping for any kind of response. But the forest swallowed every sound, and the quiet started to feel unnatural. We kept walking until dusk, a steady, plodding rhythm that numbed our limbs and frayed our nerves. Just as I was beginning to think we have to turn back for the night, I spotted something through the trees, a dark shape hulking and motionless against the snow, barely discernible in the twilight. At first I thought it was a downed tree, but as we approached, the smell hit me iron, sharp and sickening. And when I saw it, the body of Sawyer Morgan, slumped and frozen, lay before them. His skin was a pale bluish hue against the snow. His jacket was shredded, hanging in tatters around his body and his throat. It looked as though something had torn it open with a single swipe. Mike swore under his breath, taking a step back. "Holy hell," he muttered. "That's not an accident." We circled the scene, examining the snow for tracks, trying to piece together what had happened. But the snow was disturbed, a mess of half-covered footprints and what looked like claw marks gouged into the ground. I'd seen my share of animal attacks, but this was something else. No bear or wolf could do this with such precision, and there wasn't a trace of blood anywhere except on the body. We marked the location and radioed in, telling dispatch we'd found one of the 3 missing hikers. But the response was static, broken up by the worsening storm. It was already getting dark, and with the temperature dropping fast, we knew we didn't have long before the cold would start taking its toll. Just then we heard it. A faint sound, like something scraping against a tree somewhere close by. Both of us froze, straining our ears. But the noise had stopped as quickly as it had started. Mike whispered, "Ellis, tell me you heard that." I nodded, gripping my flashlight a little tighter. The darkness around us seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. We moved slowly, inching forward when another sound broke the silence. It was closer this time, almost right beside us. A crunch, as if something heavy was moving through the snow, slowly and deliberately. I raised my flashlight, casting the beam over the trees. For a moment, I thought I saw something, a massive shape standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching. I couldn't make out any details, just the bulk of it, like a bear. Wrong. He was hunched, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and there was an unsettling intelligence in the way it moved. Then it lunged toward us. Mike yelled, stumbling back as I aimed my light at the thing, catching a glimpse of claws that looked almost human, elongated fingers tipped with ragged nails. It made a sound, a deep, wet rasp as if it were struggling to breathe, and that was enough to send both of us running. We sprinted through the trees, stumbling over roots and rocks, the sound of its pursuit thundering behind us. I didn't dare look back, too focused on staying ahead of whatever that thing was. I could hear Mike gasping, his footsteps pounding beside mine, and I prayed we'd make it to the trail before it closed the distance. But then, just as we broke through a clearing, I heard him cry out. I turned in time to see him go down, his body dragged back into the shadows as his flashlight flickered and died. His scream was cut short, leaving nothing but silence. I didn't stop, I couldn't. It was survival at that point, pure and simple. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs felt like they would give out. When I finally dared to stop, I realized I had no idea where I was. The snow was falling in thick sheets now, covering my tracks and leaving me stranded in the middle of nowhere. The silence was oppressive. The forest was unnaturally still. I crouched down, catching my breath, my mind racing as I tried to figure out my next move. That's when I heard it again, that scraping sound, soft and deliberate, coming from somewhere close. I ducked behind a tree, my heart pounding as I fumbled for my radio. I whispered into it, hoping for some miracle that it would pick up a signal, but all I got was static. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. The creature stood at the edge of the trees, its head tilted as if studying me. Now that I could see it more clearly, I felt a wave of nausea. It had the body of a predator, lean and muscular, but its skin was stretched too tightly over its bones, giving it a twisted, almost human look. Its mouth was too wide, filled with rows of teeth that looked like they belonged to a shark. It had those hands, long, bony fingers that flexed and curled as it watched me. I took a step back, my mind racing through my options, which weren't many. I didn't have a weapon, not even a pocket knife. Running seemed like a death sentence, but staying put wasn't much better. The creature took a step forward, its gaze fixed on me, and I knew I had to make a choice. In a desperate move, I turned and bolted, weaving between trees, trying to lose it in the dense forest. The thing let out a guttural hiss, and I heard it crashing through in the brush behind me. My legs felt like lead, each step was heavier than the last, but I pushed forward, ignoring the burning in my lungs. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually I stumbled out of the forest and into a clearing, my chest heaving as I collapsed onto the ground. The storm had worsened. Snow blinded me, and I realized I'd somehow circled back to where we found Sawyer's body. Except now there were two bodies. Mike lay sprawled in the snow, his body twisted at an unnatural angle, his face frozen in a look of sheer terror. I staggered to my feet, my mind reeling. The thing had dragged him back here, left him as a warning, or maybe just for sport. I didn't want to stick around to find out which. I turned and stumbled through the snow, the cold seeped into my bones, numbing my fingers and toes. I kept moving, driven by pure instinct, not daring to look back. I could still feel it somewhere in the darkness, following me. Relentless and patient, its presence like a shadow pressing in around me. When I finally made it back to the edge of the forest, the first light of dawn was breaking over the horizon. I collapsed onto the ground, the snow bit into my skin, but I didn't care. I was alive, and that was enough. For now. The next few days passed in a blur of debriefings, search parties, and sleepless nights. I told my story over and over to park officials, local law enforcement, and eventually to a pair of stone-faced FBI agents who listened without comment and left without explanation. No one believed me, not really. They nodded and took notes, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. They chalked it up to hypothermia, shock, maybe even hallucinations brought on by extreme stress. I had explanations for everything. The shredded bodies were the work of a particularly aggressive bear. The strange tracks were just distorted by the melting snow, but I knew what I saw. The image of that creature, its two human eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence, was burned into my mind. I couldn't shake it. Couldn't rationalize it away like the others seemed so eager to do. The search for Jody O'Connor continued, but hope dwindled with each passing day. I wasn't part of those search parties. They said I needed rest, time to recover from my ordeal, but I knew the real reason. Y'all afraid of what I might say, what I might do if I went back into those woods. So I sat in my cabin, jumping at every sound, peering out the windows at the tree line, always half expecting to see that thing emerge from the shadows. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, because every time I closed my eyes, I was back there, running through the endless dark, the creature's rasping breath always just behind me. It was on the 5th night after my return that something changed. I was sitting at my kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, when I heard it, a soft scraping sound like claws on wood coming from just outside my door. My blood ran cold. I sat there frozen, barely daring to breathe. The scraping continued, slow and deliberate, as if whatever was out there knew I was listening and was savoring my fear. Then, silence. I don't know how long I sat there, straining my ears for any sound. When I finally worked up the courage to approach the door, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle, I found nothing. No tracks in the snow, no claw marks on the wood, nothing to prove that anything had been there at all. The tape to my door was a small scrap of blue fabric, the same color as Jodie O'Connor's scarf. That was when I knew this wasn't over. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't done with me. And somehow I knew that Jodie was still alive out there, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't even begin to imagine. I had a choice to make. I could stay here, safe behind locked doors, slowly going mad with fear and guilt. Or I could go back out there into the heart of that merciless wilderness and face whatever was waiting for me. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. As a park ranger, it was my job to help people, to save them if I could. And more than that, I needed answers. I needed to know what this thing was, why it was here, and how to stop it. So I began to plan. I gathered supplies, studied maps, and prepared myself as best I could for what lay ahead. Because I knew that when I stepped back into those woods, I would be entering a world where the old rules no longer applied. A world where ancient primal forces held sway and where survival depended on more than just skill and luck. I was going back, and this time I was determined to end this one way or another. Long did I set out. The sky was a sheet of steel gray, promising more snow. I'd left a note for my supervisor, knowing full well that by the time they found it, I'd be too far gone for them to stop me. I was going off-grid against every protocol and regulation, but I knew in my gut that this was something I had to do alone. I retraced my steps from that fateful day, pushing deeper into the wilderness. The forest seemed different now, more alive somehow. Every shadow held a threat, every rustle of branches a potential attack. But I pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and determination. As night fell, I made camp in a small clearing, my back against a large boulder. Sleep was out of the question, so I sat there alert and waiting. My flashlight and hunting knife were close at hand. The hours crawled by, each sound in the darkness setting my nerves on edge. It was just before dawn when I heard it. That familiar scraping sound, closer than ever before. I stood slowly, my heart pounding as I swept my flashlight across the tree line. And there it was, just at the edge of the light. The creature stood motionless, watching me with those two intelligent eyes. For a long moment we stared at each other, neither moving. Then slowly and deliberately it turned and loped off into the forest. It wasn't running away, I realized. It was leading me somewhere. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I followed. The creature led me on a winding path through the forest, always staying just at the edge of my vision. We climbed higher into the mountains, the air growing thin and bitter cold. After what felt like hours, we emerged into a vast, snow-covered valley. And there, in the center of the valley, was a cave. Its entrance gaped like an open wound in the mountainside, dark and foreboding. The creature paused at the mouth of the cave, then slipped inside. I stood there, my breath clouding in the frigid air, knowing that to follow would be madness. When I had come too far to turn back now, steeling myself, I clicked on my flashlight and entered the cave. The tunnel descended steeply, the walls slick with ice. As I ventured deeper, I began to notice strange markings on the walls, crude drawings that looked ancient, depicting stick figures in a looming, monstrous shape that made my blood run cold. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up into a vast cavern. My flashlight beam seemed pitifully small in the darkness, but it was enough to reveal the horror before me. Scattered across the cavern floor were bones. Hundreds of them, some ancient and yellowed, others frighteningly fresh. And there, huddled in a corner, was Jodie O'Connor. She was alive, but her eyes were vacant, staring into nothingness. Before I could reach her, a low growl echoed through the cavern. The creature emerged from the shadows, but it wasn't alone. Behind it came others, similar but each uniquely horrifying. I realized with a shock that these weren't animals, but something other, something that had been here, hidden away in these mountains for who knows how long. As they advanced, I raised my knife, knowing it was futile, but determined to go down fighting. But then, something unexpected happened. Jodie began to sing. It was a haunting melody, unlike anything I'd ever heard before. The creatures stopped, cocking their heads as if listening. In that moment of distraction, I grabbed Jodie and ran. We scrambled through the tunnels, the creatures' roars echoing behind us. By some miracle, we made it out of the cave and down the mountain, not stopping until we reached the ranger station. The official report tells a different story. Jodie O'Connor, suffering from exposure and trauma, was found wandering in the woods. The bodies of her husbands Sawyer and Mike were recovered and their deaths attributed to animal attacks. My own account was disregarded, written off as the ramblings of a man pushed to his mental limits. Jodie never spoke about what happened in that cave. The last I heard, she was living somewhere in the lower 48, as far from Alaska as she could get. As for me, I couldn't bring myself to leave. Someone needed to know the truth to keep watch, because sometimes on cold, clear nights I can hear them howls that are not quite animal, not quite human, echoing from the highest peaks. And I know they're still out there, waiting. The wilderness holds many secrets, and some of them are better left undiscovered. But once you've seen behind the veil, there's no going back. All you can do is stay vigilant and hope that the ancient things that dwell in the dark places of the world remain there, hidden from sight. But deep down I know it's only a matter of time before they emerge again, and when they do, I'll be ready. My name is Hal Parker, and I've been a search and rescue officer in Olympic National Park for over a decade now. I thought I'd seen it all. Every manner of rough terrain, unpredictable weather, and lost hikers. But nothing could have prepared me for what Bernie Gray and I encountered that misty day. We were tracking a 22-year-old hiker named Tommy Chalmers who had gone missing near Elk Lake 2 days prior. Tommy was known for venturing off trail, confident in his own sense of direction over maps and compasses. But out here, that kind of hubris gets you lost, or worse. As Bernie and I hit the trail that morning, an eerie stillness hung in the air. Fog crept between the towering evergreens, muffling the usual chatter of birds and insects. Boney's gruff humor helped cut the tension as we marched deeper into the shadowy timberland. An hour in, we spotted shreds of a red flannel shirt on a fallen cedar. "Looks like our boy Tommy went off script," Bernie remarked, as we followed the clues off the maintained path and into a nearly impassable tangle of underbrush and knotted roots. Every step squelched in the boggy earth. That's when the metallic scent hit us, faint at first, then inescapable. In the forest, blood usually means a predator found its prey, nature balancing itself out. But this was different. Fresher, more ominous. A few paces later, we found the source. Not Tommy Chalmers, but what remained of some other unfortunate soul, torn asunder into grisly, unidentifiable pieces across the forest floor. Who animal did this? Bernie knelt to examine an abnormally large paw print in the mud as I scanned the perimeter. Then I saw it. A flicker of movement in my periphery, low to the ground, too fast to be human. Bernie saw it too. We exchanged a look, our hands drifted to our flare guns as we pivoted slowly toward the rustling underbrush. The creature emerged from the shadows like something out of a nightmare. It crouched on two legs, all jutting bones and sinewy muscle beneath patches of matted fur and sickly pale flesh. The arms hung too long, like a skeleton playing at being a beast. "This thing, it's hunting us," Bernie murmured, his face ashen. No sooner had he spoken than it charged. A blur of motion, flashing teeth and outstretched claws. Bernie got a flare off, singeing its hide, but not before it raked his arm and wrenched him to the ground. I took aim and fired, catching the creature in the back. It released Bernie with a hiss, then fixed me with eyes empty of anything but malice and hunger. Slowly we backed away as it stalked us, moving with a predator's intelligent patience. Bernie's leg was badly lacerated, slowing our retreat to an agonizing crawl. I didn't dare glance back to see if it still tailed us. Its presence electrified the air, prickling the hairs on my neck. While Bernie collapsed at the edge of a bog, clutching his mangled limb, I knew we were out of options. Drawing a shaky breath, I pulled a flare from my pack and braced to make our last stand. But in that moment, the improbable whir of helicopter blades shattered the forest's menacing hush. The cavalry had arrived by some miracle. As we were winched to safety, I caught a final glimpse of the creature melting into the shadows, denied its quarry. For now, the unnerving sense of its gaze, ancient and inhuman, never left me. Even as Bernie was whisked into surgery and I sat down to write my report, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that it was still out there waiting. 20 years later and over 1,000 miles away, I found myself chasing ghosts again. I transferred to serve as a search and rescue officer in Montana's Glacier National Park, swapping damp Olympic forests for a landscape of towering pines and windswept mountain crags. The radio call came in just as I was choking down my third bitter cup of coffee. A hiker named Evelyn Morris, 28, had failed to return from an off-trail excursion the day before. Her husband was frantic, insisting that something must have happened. I met up with Jasper Flynn, a green recruit who still had that motivated shine to him. We geared up and hit the trailhead, tracing Evelyn's planned route into the rugged backcountry. About 2 miles in, we found the first sign, a red scarf, the bright swatch of fabric incongruous against a gnarled branch. "At least we know we're headed the right way," I said, as Jasper bagged the evidence. He flashed a smirk, some of that new recruit bravado coming through. But as we pressed deeper, unease crept over me. The chatter of wildlife faded to a hush, and the air seemed to thicken, gravid with some impending threat. When we reached the small clearing, its floor churned with signs of a struggle. Dread crystallized into icy certainty. Then we saw the blood, the torn fabric hanging from the brambles, dark wetness glistening in the undergrowth. Jasper swore under his breath. I warned him to stay sharp and keep your bear spray ready. Even as the words left my mouth, I knew we weren't dealing with any bear. The stench confirmed it. Throat and musk and that same sour metal reek from all those years ago. Breaking through the tree line into a mossy glen, we found Evelyn, or what was left of her. Limbs wrenched at angles nature never intended, skin shredded to the bone, ribs cracked open in a macabre bloom. I didn't need to check for a pulse. Before I could reach for my radio to call it in, a rustle in the brush froze me in my tracks. Jasper reached for his sidearm as the noise grew to a cacophony of snapping branches. We aimed our weapons at the tree line, fingers on the triggers, barely breathing. But it wasn't the creature that burst forth. It was a man, clothes torn and blood spattered, eyes blown wide with terror. I managed to gasp out a plea for help before collapsing at our feet, shaking like a leaf. My name is Daniel, the man stammered out between heaving breaths as we tried to calm him. It took my friend Jenna. Jasper and I exchanged a loaded glance. I kept my voice level the way you talk to a spooked horse. What took her, Daniel? Can you describe it? He shook his head frantically, his gaze darting to the shadows between the trees. It was like a wolf, but bigger. And it walked on two legs, those eyes. A shudder ran through him, and I felt an icy finger trace my spine. It couldn't be the same creature from Olympic 2 decades and hundreds of miles removed. But I'd never forget those eyes, that grasping, hunger-stalled gaze. We need to move, I said, hauling Daniel to his feet. Can you walk? He managed a shaky nod, clinging to my arm for support as we picked our way back the way we come. But the forest had changed. Landmarks vanished, and the path was swallowed up by snarls of underbrush that seemed to move when I looked away. Even the sun was suddenly cryptic, impossible to navigate by. From deep in the whispering pines, a howl shattered the tense silence. No animal I'd ever heard made a sound like that. Primordial and ravenous and triumphant, like it had us exactly where it wanted us. Jasper whirled around, searching for the source, his hand white-knuckled on his sidearm. Daniel whimpered, his knees giving out. I hooked an arm around him, half carrying his weight. If I wanted this much whining, I'd call my ex. I growled, scanning the trees for any hint of motion. We needed to get to open ground. Break the tray line and we'd at least see it coming. The howl came again, closer. The movement in my periphery, a flash of matted fur and emaciated limbs there and gone between the shattered trunks. Is that it? Jasper hissed through clenched teeth. I cut him off with a sharp gesture. It was toying with us now, darting at the edges of our vision, wearing us down. We stumbled into a small clearing, and then it was on us, bursting from the shadows, a nightmare made flesh. The same elongated limbs, the same sharp teeth grin from all those years ago. It had found me again. Jasper got a shot off, clipping its shoulder. The creature barely flinched. I shoved Daniel behind me and drew my own weapon for all the good it would do. The beast crouched, muscles coiling beneath its sickly hide, ready to pounce. From behind us, Daniel screamed. I whirled around just in time to see a second creature dragging Daniel into the underbrush. His shrieks cut off with a wet, crunching silence that told me we were too late. Jasper and I went back to back, guns trained on the circling creatures. There were 2 of them. Of course there were 2 of them, probably mates. Probably with a den of horrors tucked away somewhere in this godforsaken forest. What's the plan, boss? There was a tremor underneath the bravado in Jasper's voice. I could practically hear his heartbeat ratcheting into overdrive. I swallowed hard, mouth dry as the Nevada desert. Well, I'm open to suggestions, but seeing as I left my monster repellent back at the station, I say we run like hell. The creatures prowled closer, lips peeled back from those nightmare teeth. I counted us down under my breath. On 3. 1, 2. Before I hit 3, they lunged. We bolted, crashing through the underbrush in a hail of snapping branches and thundering footfalls. I felt hot breath on the back of my neck, heard the snap of powerful jaws inches from my ear. We broke through the tree line onto a ridge overlooking a ravine. Not choice but to jump. I grabbed Jasper by his pack and leaped. For a few breathless seconds, we were airborne, the creature's furious snarls dopplering away. Then we hit the side of the ravine in a cascade of loose dirt and tumbling rocks, half falling, half sliding to the bottom. Winded, bleeding from a dozen scratches, we hauled ourselves up and staggered into a narrow cave at the base of the cliff. The enraged howls of our pursuers echoed down from the ridge. They paced the edge, unwilling or unable to make the jump. For now, we were safe, but we both knew it was temporary. They had our scent now, and If the deer carcasses went past on the track game were any indication, they had no qualms about playing the long game. "What the hell are those things?" Jasper demanded, his voice hitching with barely contained hysteria. "And what do they want?" I thought of those ancient eyes boring into mine, the malevolent intelligence behind them, the simple primal hunger. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've seen something like them before, a long time ago, but I never thought..." I trailed off, shaking my head. It didn't matter now. We needed a plan, a way out of these woods that didn't end with us as creature chow. As if on cue, the howls above abruptly cut off. Jasper and I exchanged a wary glance. Slowly, hardly daring to breathe, we edged to the mouth of the cave. Silence, no sign of the beasts. Just the wind sighing through the pines and the muted rustle of small creatures going about their business, unaware of the horrors skulking through their forests. Jasper squinted up at the sun, gauging its position. "If we can get back to the trail, maybe we can outpace them, get to the ranger station, and call for backup." I nodded. It was as good a plan as any, better than huddling in this cave until the creatures got bored or clever enough to find a way down. Peering up at the ridge, plotting handholds and footholds, I tried to quiet the little voice whispering that we were doing exactly what they wanted, that a creature smart enough to drive us here, to bait our flight into its chosen killing ground, wouldn't just let us walk away, but it was walk or die coward. So, with a steadying breath, I turned to Jasper. "Let's move." Scaling the cliff face was a sweaty, heart-pounding ordeal. Every scuffle of claw and rock from above threatened to send us plummeting. But we made it to the top without incident, hauling ourselves over the lip onto blessed solid ground. The forest was eerily still, no birdsong, no skittering of small creatures in the underbrush. Just the creak of branches overhead and our own labored breathing. I didn't like it, felt like the calm before the storm. We oriented ourselves, the sun dipping toward late afternoon in the west. If we hustled, we could make the ranger station by nightfall. The thought of being out here in the dark with those things made me shudder, despite the warm breeze. As we marched, Jasper halted suddenly, his head cocked. "You hear that?" I strained my ears. There, faint but unmistakable, were the thumps of helicopter blades. Jasper's eyes met mine, wild hope kindling in their depths. We crashed through the brush toward the sound, heedless of the noise we were making. If we could just flag it down, get some aerial support, maybe a rifle or three. Breaking into a clearing, we skidded to a halt, our hearts plummeting. No helicopter. Just the tattered remains of a campsite strewn across the blood-soaked earth. And in the center, two ravaged corpses, their limbs mangled and torsos cracked open like macabre panatas. "Jesus," Jasper choked out, turning away and retching into the bushes. I breathed through my mouth, trying not to add my own breakfast to the mess. Then there were the sound again, louder, coming from above. I craned my neck skyward. There, caught in the upper branches of a massive pine, was a backpack, its straps tangled in the needles and dangling from it. A portable speaker, still blaring that maddening helicopter sound. A chill ran down my spine as the pieces snapped into gruesome place. The creatures had set a lure, drawn their prey here with the promise of rescue, then ambushed them. Cut off any call for help, which meant they weren't just hungry, they were smart, and they were watching us. Jasper met my gaze, the same realization dawning in his wide eyes. "We need to go," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. Now we turned to run and damn near collided with the man staggering out of the underbrush. He was haggard, his horn closed and stained rust brown, one leg dragging behind him at a sickening angle. "Help," he croaked, reaching for us with a trembling hand. "Please." Jasper caught him as he pitched forward, lowering him to the blood-tacky grass. The man clutched at his shirt front, words spilling out between hitching breaths. It took them picked us off one by one, toyed with us. Oh God, the screaming. He broke off, shaking so hard I thought he might fly apart. I gripped his shoulder, trying to ground him. Hey, stay with me. What's your name? Ethan, he managed. Ethan Crane. We weren't supposed to be out here, but Kai said he knew a shortcut. Overhead, a branch cracked like a gunshot. We all flinched, our heads jerking up. Jasper met my gaze, a muscle jumping in his jaw. Time to go. But we couldn't just leave Ethan. Nobody somehow managed to survive this long. I jerked my chin at Jasper. Give me a hand. We'll carry him if we have to. Jasper hesitated for a split second, eyeing the tree line like he expected fangs and claws to come bursting through at any moment. We couldn't blame him. But then he nodded, his jaw firming with resolve. Together we hauled Ethan up, rigging a makeshift crutch from a branch to take some of his weight. He bit back a yelp. We set off at a grueling pace, Ethan hopping and stumbling between us. Every gasp of pain as his mangled leg jounced made me wince in sympathy, but better a few broken bones than ending up creature food. The forest blurred past individual trees, melding into a smear of greens and browns. My heart hammered against my ribs, lungs burning with each heaving breath. Beside me, Jasper wasn't faring much better, his face flushed and slick with sweat, but still no sign of the creatures, no flicker of shadow at the corner of my eye, no prickling at the back of my neck. It should have been a relief instead. Dread coiled tighter in my gut with every step. Then we heard it. That bone-chilling howl far too close. It shattered the forest hush like a brick through a stained glass window. Ethan let out a low, animal whimper, knuckles going white on his branch crutch. Seconds later, it emerged ahead of us, rising from the shadows like a waking nightmare. I could have sworn it was grinning, baring those shark teeth in a macabre parody of a smile. We stumbled to a halt, Jasper fumbling for his sidearm, a glance behind, already knowing what I'd see. The second creature stalking from the undergrowth at our rear, cutting off any retreat. They had us pinned, caught between their hulking forms like fish in a barrel. My mind raced, scrabbling for a plan, an idea. Anything that wasn't just a final stand in the middle of this godforsaken forest. The trees, Ethan hissed, voice cracking with fear and pain. We've got to get up high, maybe they can't. It was a desperate gamble, but it was all we had. I met Jasper's gaze, saw my own resolve reflected back. On an unspoken count, we heaved Ethan toward the nearest sturdy trunk. The creatures lunged. I fired wildly, shots going wide as we scrambled for handholds on the rough bark. Claws screeched against wood, snapping jaws missing my dangling foot by inches as I hauled myself up. We climbed higher, bark shredding our palms, breath sobbing in our throats. Ethan clung to a branch, face going bone pale as his shattered leg hung uselessly. Below, the creatures circled, snarling their frustration. For one heartbeat, too, I dared to hope. Then the larger of the beasts reared up, bracing its front claws against the trunk. The wood shuddered under the impact as it began to climb, powerful limbs pulling it up with horrific ease. "It's coming," Jasper cried, voice pitching high and panicky. "What do we do?" Ethan, face set in a rictus of agony and terror, fumbled at his belt. "When I say you run, get to your people, bring help," I opened my mouth to ask what the hell he thought he was doing. Then I saw the glint of metal in his hand, the smooth oblong shape of a grenade. He met my gaze. Something like peace settling over his ravaged features. "Thank you for trying. Now go." He yanked the pin and let himself fall straight into the path of the climbing creature. I had one glimpse of its eyes going wide with something almost like surprise before the world dissolved into fire and noise and shrapnel. And I was falling. I came to as Jasper slapped my cheeks, his shouts filtering through the ringing in my ears. eyes. To move. Come on, we can stay here. Everything hurt. Splinters of wood peppered my arms and face. Something warm and wet trickled into my eyes. I blanked it away, the coppery tang telling me it was blood, the tree, Ethan. It came rushing back and I shot upright, ignoring how the world tilted alarmingly. The creature's gone, Jasper said, hauling me to my feet. We're dead. I don't know, but we gotta go before they come back. I staggered, finding my balance. The blast had torn a crater in the forest floor, bits of bloodied fur and flesh scattered like macabre confetti, no sign of Ethan or the creatures. Part of me wanted to collapse, to curl into a ball and gibber until the world started making sense again. But I pushed it down, walked it away. Falling apart was a luxury I couldn't afford, not yet. So I ran. Jasper was at my side, crashing through the undergrowth like the hounds of hell were on our heels, for all I knew they were. It could have been minutes or hours later when we stumbled into the blessed sight of the ranger station. I all but fell through the door. Jasper slammed and bolted it behind us. I lunged for the radio, not bothering with protocol or call signs. This is Hal Parker. We need immediate backup at Ranger Station 4. Multiple fatalities, civilian casualties, and a pair of hostiles still potentially active. The voice that crackled back was taut with barely restrained urgency. Roger that, Ranger Parker. Can you clarify the nature of these hostiles? I barked a laugh, teetering on the knife's edge of hysteria. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, just send everyone you've got and tell them to bring the biggest guns they have. It was a blur after that. The cavalry arrived, medevac choppers and tactical teams swarming the station. They listened to our halting, disjointed account with carefully neutral expressions, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Not that I could blame them. If I hadn't seen it myself, lived through the impossible nightmare of the last few hours, I think I was crazy too. Hell, maybe I was. But as they picked through the carnage at the blast site, as they took samples and measurements and a whole host of other official-sounding actions, I saw the first flickers of doubt. The first hints that maybe, just maybe, we weren't raving madmen. In the end, the official story was some sort of rabid mutant bear, a freak aberration of nature, tragic but explainable, case closed. I knew better. And from the haunted look in Jasper's eyes, the way he clung to the normalcy of civilization like a drowning man to a lifeline, he did too. They offered me counseling, time off to recuperate. I turned it down. The scars I carried, physical and mental, weren't the kind that healed with rest and talking it out. Instead, I threw myself into my work, took every extra shift, every off-the-books mission I could wrangle. If I ran myself ragged, if I pushed my body to the breaking point, maybe I could outpace the memories, the nightmares. But in the quiet moments, in the space between breaths, there were waiting those dead, soulless eyes, that rictus grin of needle teeth, the wet, crunching sounds of tearing flesh. I knew then with a bone-deep certainty that it wasn't over. That somewhere out there, in the deepest, darkest corners of the world, those creatures still lurked, still hungered. And that no matter how far I ran, no matter how many layers of duty and denial I wrapped around myself, I would never truly escape the horrors I'd witnessed in those woods. Such is the burden of those who stare into the abyss and live to tell the tale, the price we pay for surviving the unsurvivable. But someone has to bear witness, someone has to remember the truth, no matter how ugly, how terrifying, to light a candle against the dark. That's my job now, my penance and my purpose. And God help me, I'll see it through, no matter where it leads, no matter the cost. Because I know deep in the marrow of my bones that this is only the beginning. That there are things out there, ancient and hungry and utterly, terrifyingly alien. And it's my job to stand against them. To be the thin line between the unsuspecting masses and the nightmares that wait in the shadows, it's a hell of a job. But somebody's got to do it. The email arrived on a dreary Tuesday afternoon. Its cheerful tone was a stark contrast to the gloomy weather outside my office window. Jake, my old college roommate, was organizing a reunion camping trip in the Navajo Nation lands of Arizona. "Come on, it'll be just like old times," he wrote. "We'll hike, tell stories around the campfire, and maybe even spot some wildlife." I'm on back of my chair, memories of our college adventures flooding back. Jake had always been the outdoorsy type, dragging me on weekend excursions that invariably ended with mosquito bites and sore muscles. But there was also an undeniable thrill to those trips, a sense of connection to nature that had been missing in my corporate life. My cursor hovered over the reply button as I weighed my options. It had been years since I had gone camping, and the thought of sleeping on the hard ground didn't exactly fill me with enthusiasm. But something about Jake's invitation tugged at me, a mixture of nostalgia and a desire to break free from my mundane routine. With a deep breath, I clicked reply and typed out a quick response. "Count me in." "When do we leave?" Jake's reply came almost instantly, filled with exclamation points and smiley faces. He laid out the details. We'd meet up in a small town on the edge of the Navajo Nation in 2 weeks' time. "Pack light," he advised, "but bring plenty of water and good hiking boots. Oh, and don't forget a flashlight. It gets pretty dark out there at night." As I read through his instructions, a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was agreeing to something more than just a simple camping trip. The mention of darkness stirred something in my memory. Old stories I'd heard about the Navajo lands, whispered tales of strange creatures that roamed at night. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. Those were just stories, myths meant to scare tourists and add a bit of mystery to the landscape. This was going to be a fun trip with old friends, nothing more. Still, as I closed my laptop and turned to look out at the rain-streaked city beyond my window, I couldn't quite silence the small voice in the back of my mind. It whispered of ancient legends and things that lurked in the shadows, of beings that straddled the line between human and animal. "It's just camping," I muttered to myself, trying to quell the growing unease in my stomach. What could possibly go wrong? Little did I know, as I began to plan for the trip, that those words would come back to haunt me. The Navajo lands held secrets older than time itself, and some legends I would soon learn had teeth. As the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, I pulled into the dusty parking lot of the small general store in Kayenta, Arizona. The air was crisp with the chill of early morning, carrying the scent of sage and desert dust. I stepped out of my rental car, stretching my legs after the long drive from Phoenix. Jake's beat-up Jeep was already there, looking like it had seen better days. As I approached, I could see him chatting animatedly with 2 other figures, Sarah and Mike, the remaining members of our little college group. It had been years since I'd seen them, and for a moment I hesitated, suddenly aware of how much time had passed. "Hey, look who finally decided to join us," Jake called out, his grin wide and infectious. Just like that, the years melted away. Sarah enveloped me in a warm hug, her curly hair tickling my cheek, while Mike gave me a hearty slap on the back. "Glad you could make it." "City slicker," Mike teased, eyeing my pristine hiking boots and brand new backpack. "Thought you might have gotten soft on us." I laughed, falling easily back into our old dynamic. Just because I don't live in a tent doesn't mean I can rough it for a few days. We spent the next hour going over our supplies, making sure we had everything we needed for the 5-day trek into the Navajo wilderness. Jake, Ellie the Prepared One, had already obtained the necessary permits and hired a local guide to lead us to our first campsite. As we were loading up the Jeep, an elderly Navajo man approached us. His face was deeply lined, telling of a life lived under the harsh desert sun. He introduced himself as John Begang, our guide for the first leg of the journey. "Before we go," John said, his voice low and gravelly, There are things you should know about these lands. He paused, his dark eyes scanning each of our faces. The dying. That's all we Navajo call ourselves. We have lived here for countless generations. We know these canyons, these mesas. We know their beauty, but we also know their dangers. A heavy silence fell over our group. Even Jake, usually quick with a joke, remained quiet. John continued, "You've chosen a powerful place for your trip. The land here is alive with the spirits of our ancestors. Most are benevolent, but some," he trailed off, his gaze drifting to the distant mesas. "Some are best left undisturbed." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "What do you mean by that?" John's eyes snapped back to us. "I mean that there are old stories, old ways, things that walk in the shadows. The elders say that if you hear whispers on the wind when no one is around, if you see movement from the corner of your eye but find nothing when you turn, those are signs. Signs that you're not alone." A chill ran down my spine despite the warming air. I thought back to the stories I'd dismissed when planning this trip, the legends I'd written off as simple folklore. "You're talking about skinwalkers, aren't you?" And I found myself asking, the word feeling strange on my tongue. John's expression remained impassive, but I saw a flicker of something. Surprise, respect, in his eyes. "You know of the ye old Lucy," he said. It wasn't a question. Mike laughed nervously. "Go on, those are just stories, right? Like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster." Child didn't smile. "All stories come from somewhere, young man. The dying do not speak lightly of such things. Remember, as you walk these lands to show respect, stay together, watch out for each other, and most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." With those ominous words hanging in the air, John helped us finish loading the Jeep. As we climbed in, ready to set off on our adventure, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were embarking on something far more significant than a simple camping trip. The Jeep lurched forward, leaving behind the last vestiges of civilization. Ahead of us stretched the vast rugged landscape of the Navajo Nation, a place of stark beauty and ancient secrets. As we drove deeper into the wilderness, the modern world faded away, replaced by towering red rock formations and endless blue sky. Little did we know that with each mile we were drawing closer to an encounter that would challenge everything we thought we knew about the world and ourselves. Our first 2 days in the wilderness were uneventful, filled with the simple pleasures of hiking, setting up camp, and reconnecting with old friends. We trekked through narrow canyon, their walls adorned with ancient petroglyphs, and across vast mesas that offered breathtaking views of the surrounding landscape. Despite John's warnings, the beauty of the land had lulled us into a false sense of security. It was on the third night that things began to change. We had made camp in a small clearing, surrounded by gnarled juniper trees. The fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows on the rock face behind us. We were swapping stories and roasting marshmallows when Sarah suddenly went quiet, her eyes fixed on a point just beyond our circle of light. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice tight with tension. We all turned to look, but saw nothing but darkness. "See it?" Jake asked, his usual jovial tone tinged with concern. Sarah shook her head as if trying to clear it. "I thought I saw something like a shadow, but it moved wrong, too fast, too fluid." Mike laughed nervously. "Come on, it's probably just an animal, maybe a coyote, but I couldn't shake the unease that had settled over me." John's words echoed in my mind. "If you see movement from the corner of your eye but find nothing when you turn, those are signs." We tried to resume our conversation, but the easy camaraderie of earlier had vanished. Every snapping twig, every rustle of wind through the junipers set us on edge. As we prepared for bed, I noticed Sarah hanging small bundles of sage and cedar around our tents. When I asked her about it, she shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Just something my grandmother taught me," she said, "for protection." I didn't press further, but I saw the fear in her eyes, a a fear I was beginning to share. That night, I dreamed of running. I was racing through a maze of canyons, pursued by something I couldn't see but could sense, a presence of overwhelming malevolence. Just as it was about to catch me, I awoke with a start, my heart pounding. The pre-dawn air was frigid as I unzipped my tent. As I stepped out to relieve myself, my foot caught on something. Looking down, I saw a strange pattern drawn in the dirt, a swirl of interconnected lines that seemed to pulse with an inner light in the gray morning. I blinked, and the illusion vanished. It was just a pattern in the dirt. Nothing more. But as I stared at it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't been there when we'd gone to sleep. The mat was somber as we broke camp that morning. Dawn wanted to discuss the events of the night before, but the tension was palpable. As we hiked, I found myself walking beside Sarah, who seemed lost in thought. "Sarah," I said quietly, not wanting the others to overhear.
What do you know about skinwalkers?
She glanced at me sharply and sighed. "Not much," she admitted. "My grandmother used to tell stories, but I never paid much attention. I always thought they were just meant to scare kids into behaving." But now Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "Now, I'm not so sure. The things my grandmother said, they're starting to make sense in a way they never did before." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "She said skinwalkers were once human," Sarah explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Navajo medicine men or women who turned to dark magic. They gained the power to transform into animals, but at a terrible cost. They had to commit an unspeakable act, murder a close family member. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Why would anyone do that?" Sarah shrugged. "Power, I guess. The ability to shapeshift, to curse others, to live far beyond a normal human lifespan. My grandmother said the price was their humanity. They became something other. Not human, not animal, but something in between, and far worse than either." We walked in silence for a while, the weight of her words hanging between us. Finally, I asked, "Do you think that's what we're dealing with here?" Sarah's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I don't know, but I do know that we need to be careful. Very careful." As the day wore on, the landscape began to change. The wide open spaces gave way to a labyrinth of slot canyons, their narrow walls rising hundreds of feet above us. The sun barely penetrated these stone corridors, leaving us walking in twilight even at midday. It was in one of these canyons that we made our most disturbing discovery yet. Rounding a bend, we came upon a small alcove in the canyon wall, and there, painted in what looked disturbingly like dried blood, was a symbol, a twisted, malevolent version of the one I'd seen outside my tent that morning. Jake, always the scientist, moved closer to examine it. "This looks fresh," he muttered, reaching out to touch it. "Don't," Sarah cried, grabbing his arm. "We shouldn't touch it. We shouldn't even be here." Mike scoffed, but I could see the fear behind his bravado. "It's probably just some kids playing a prank," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. As we stood there debating what to do, a wind began to pick up. It whistled through the canyon, carrying with it a sound that made my blood run cold. A low, guttural growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We need to leave," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. And no one argued. We turned and began to retrace our steps, moving as quickly as we dared in the confined space of the canyon. The growl followed us, growing louder and more insistent, and underneath it I could swear I heard something else, the sound of footsteps keeping pace with us no matter how fast we moved. As we finally emerged from the canyon into a wider valley, the sounds faded. We all stood there panting, looking at each other with wild eyes. "What the hell was that?" Mike demanded, his face pale beneath his tan. No one had an answer, but we all knew, deep down, that we had crossed a line. We had entered a realm where the old stories were proving all too real, and the dangers were far greater than any of us had imagined. At night, we made camp in a small grove of pinyon pines, their gnarled branches offering some illusion of protection. No one suggested building a fire. Somehow we all knew that drawing attention to ourselves would be a bad idea. We ate a cold dinner in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. As the last light faded from the sky, the darkness seemed to press in around us, alive with whispers and half-glimpsed movements. Maybe we should head back, Jake said, suddenly breaking the silence. This isn't what I had in mind when I planned this trip. Part of me wanted to agree to pack up and run back to the safety of civilization. But another part, a part I was only just beginning to acknowledge, knew it was too late for that. Whatever had taken notice of us wasn't going to simply let us walk away. I don't think that's an option anymore, I said quietly. We're in this now, whatever this is. Sarah nodded, her face grim in the pale moonlight. We need to stick together, that's the most important thing. No matter what happens, we can't let it separate us. We all murmured agreement, drawing closer together almost unconsciously. As we prepared for bed, we decided to sleep in pairs, Sarah with me, Jake with Mike. Safety in numbers, we told ourselves, trying to ignore the voice that whispered it wouldn't be enough. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when Sarah's scream jolted me awake. I scrambled out of my sleeping bag, my heart pounding, to find her staring wide-eyed at the tent opening. Who was there? She gasped. Right there, looking in at us. What was? I asked. Even this dread pulled in my stomach. Sarah shook her head. Her whole body was trembling. I don't know. It looked like a man, but not. The proportions were all wrong, and its eyes she broke off, shuddering. By this time, Jake and Mike had joined us, alerted by the commotion. We searched the area around the tents, but found nothing. No footprints, no disturbance in the dirt. It was as if whatever Sarah had seen had simply melted away into the night. None of us slept after that. We sat in a tight circle, our backs to each other, staring out into the darkness. The night seemed to stretch on endlessly, filled with small sounds that set our nerves on edge, the rustle of wind through the pines, the distant cry of a coyote that sounded almost, but not quite human. As the first light of dawn began to color the eastern sky, we heard it, a low rhythmic chanting coming from somewhere in the trees. The language was unlike anything I'd ever heard, guttural and ancient. It made my skin crawl and my head swim. We need to go, Jake said, his voice hoarse. Now, we didn't bother packing up camp. Grabbing only our day packs with water and some food, we set off at a brisk pace, trying to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever was out there. But as we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't escaping. With every step, the chanting seemed to get louder, coming from all around us now. And underneath it, I could hear something else, the sound of footsteps matching our pace, drawing ever closer. By midday, it became clear that we were lost. The familiar landmarks we had been using to navigate had somehow shifted, leaving us disoriented in a landscape that seemed to change with every passing hour. The sun, usually a reliable guide, was hidden behind a bank of dark clouds that had rolled in from nowhere. This is impossible, Jake muttered, staring at his GPS. According to this, we've been walking in circles. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Or something's been leading us in circles, I said, voicing the feel we'd all been harboring. Mike let out a harsh laugh. Come on, you can seriously believe that it's just... We're tired, stressed, and we're not thinking clearly. But even as he spoke, his eyes darted nervously from shadow to shadow. We all felt it, the sense of being watched, hunted. The chanting had faded, but in its place was an oppressive silence, broken only by our labored breathing and the crunch of our boots on the rocky ground. It was Sarah who finally said what we were all thinking. We can't keep running, she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Whatever this thing is, it's toying with us. We need to make a stand. Jake nodded slowly. Sarah's right, he said. We need to turn this around and become the hunters instead of the hunted. The idea seemed ludicrous. How could we, four city dwellers armed with nothing but hiking gear, hope to hunt something that seemed to bend the very landscape to its will? But we were out of option. Our water was running low, and we were all exhausted from lack of sleep and constant tension. We found a defensible position, a small plateau with a clear view of the surrounding area. As Jake and Mike gathered what weapons they could, sturdy branches and sharp rocks, Sarah and I set about creating protective circles using salt from our rations and the sage and cedar shed brought. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire, we huddled together in the center of our makeshift fortress. The silence had deepened until I could hear the frantic beating of my own heart. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, we heard it, the sound that made my blood run cold. It was a laugh, but no human throat could have produced that sound. It echoed across the landscape, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "It's here," Sarah whispered, her hand finding mine in the darkness. As if in response to her words, a figure appeared at the edge of our plateau. In the dim starlight, I could make out a vaguely human shape, but there was nothing human about the way it moved. A fluid, predatory grace that sent shivers down my spine. It paced back and forth, just beyond the boundary of our salt circle. I could feel its gaze on us, hungry and ancient. And then it spoke. Its voice a guttural growl that somehow formed words. "You enter our land," it said. "Wake old spirits, now you must pay the price." Jake, always the brave one, stepped forward. "We meant no disrespect," he said. His voice remained surprisingly steady. "I'll leave, just let us go." The creature's laugh rang out again, a sound of pure malevolence. "Too late," it hissed. "The hunt has begun. Your fear feeds us, your despair strengthens us. Run, hide, fight, it matters not. In the end, you will be ours." With that, it melted back into the shadows, leaving us alone with the night and our terror. We stayed awake through the long hours of darkness, jumping at every sound, every shifting shadow. But nothing came. As dawn broke, we were still alive, still together. But we knew this was only the beginning. The Skinwalker, for we could no longer deny that's what we faced, had made its intentions clear. This was a game to it, a hunt, and we were the prey. As we prepared to move out, trying to form some plan of escape, I couldn't shake the feeling that our ordeal was far from over. In fact, I feared it was only just beginning. The next 2 days passed in a blur of constant movement and gnawing fear. We abandoned any pretense of following a set route, instead focusing solely on trying to find our way out of the wilderness. But at every turn, we were thwarted. Paths that should have led to roads or towns instead circled back on themselves. Familiar landmarks appeared in impossible places. And always we felt the presence of the Skinwalker, sometimes just a feeling of being watched. Other times we caught glimpses of a shadowy figure, always just at the edge of our vision. At night, we heard its laughter echoing across the maze, taunting us. Our supplies were running dangerously low, and exhaustion was taking its toll. We were snapping at each other, paranoia and fear fraying the bonds of our friendship. I knew we couldn't go on like this much longer. Something had to give. It was on the evening of the 5th day that everything came to a head. We had made camp in a small cave, hoping its single entrance would be easier to defend. As darkness fell, a storm rolled in, filling the sky with booming thunder and flashes of lightning. We were huddled around our meager fire when Sarah suddenly stiffened, her eyes wide with terror. "It's here," she whispered. Before any of us could react, a gust of wind extinguished our fire, plunging us into darkness. In the flashes of lightning, I caught glimpses of a figure at the mouth of the cave, sometimes appearing human, sometimes animal, its form shifting and changing with each burst of light. "You have led us on quite a chase," the Skinwalker's voice rasped, seeming to come from inside my own head. "But the game ends now. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but then I felt Sarah's hand on my arm. Her touch seemed to ground me, clearing my mind. And suddenly, I knew what we had to do. "Will," I said, surprised by the strength in my voice. "We're not playing your game anymore." I stepped forward, placing myself between the creature and my friends. In that moment, I felt something shift inside me, a connection to this land, to the ancient spirits that dwelled here. Words came to me, words in a language I didn't know, but somehow understood. As I began to chant, I felt power building around us. The air crackled with energy, and I saw confusion, then fear pass across the skinwalker's ever-changing face. "You have no power here," it snarled, but I could hear the uncertainty in its voice.
"You're wrong," I replied, continuing my chant.
"This land doesn't belong to you. It belongs to those who respect it, who honor the old ways." As I spoke, I felt my friends join me, adding their voices to mine. The cave filled with light. Not the harsh glare of lightning, but a soft golden glow that seemed to emanate from the very rocks around us. The skinwalker howled, a sound of rage and pain. It lunged towards us, but hit an invisible barrier. The golden light intensified, forcing the creature back. "Leave this place," I commanded. The words flowed through me from some source I didn't understand. "Return to the shadows and trouble us no more." With a final bone-chilling shriek, the skinwalker dissolved into mist, blown away by a sudden gust of wind. The golden light faded, leaving us in darkness once more. For a long moment, we all stood in stunned silence, hardly daring to believe it was over. Then, as if a spell had been broken, we collapsed into each other's arms, laughing and crying with relief. As the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion hit us like a wave. We slept deeply that night, undisturbed by nightmares or mysterious sounds. When dawn broke, we emerged from the cave to find the landscape transformed. Gone was the oppressive, maze-like terrain that had trapped us for days. Instead, we could see clear paths leading down from our elevated position. With renewed energy, we gathered our remaining supplies and began our journey back to civilization. The hike was long and arduous, but underpinned by a sense of lightness and hope that had been absent for days. It was late afternoon when we finally stumbled into the small town where we had started our ill-fated adventure. The sight of paved roads and buildings nearly brought us to tears. As we made our way to the local diner, still shell-shocked and barely believing our ordeal was over, we passed John Begay, our guide from the start of the trip. He looked at us with knowing eyes, nodding slowly. "You have faced the old ones," he said simply, "and you have survived. Remember what you have learned here. The land has marked you now. You are changed." With that cryptic statement, he walked away, leaving us to ponder his words as we sat down to our first proper meal in days. The journey back to our respective homes was a quiet one. We had all been fundamentally changed by our experience, and we needed time to process what had happened. In the weeks and months that followed, I found myself unable to slip back into my old routine. The corporate world that had once been my entire life now seemed trivial and meaningless. I found myself drawn to open spaces, spending weekends hiking and camping, feeling a connection to nature that I had never experienced before. I also began researching Native American legends and folklore, particularly those of the Navajo. The more I learned, the more I realized how little I truly understood about the world and its mysteries. Sarah and I kept in close contact, sharing our experiences and the changes we were going through. She had begun studying with a Navajo elder, learning the old ways and deepening her understanding of her heritage. Jake threw himself into his scientific work with new vigor, but his focus had shifted. He was now studying the intersection of quantum physics and traditional spiritual beliefs, searching for a way to reconcile what we had experienced with his scientific worldview. Mike, initially the most skeptical of us all, had perhaps undergone the most dramatic transformation. He had quit his job and was now working as a wilderness guide, leading others into the beauty and mystery of the natural world. As for me, I found myself drawn back to the Navajo lands, not to the site of our encounter, some places I knew were best left undisturbed, but to the edges of that wild country. I would sit for hours, watching the play of light and shadow across the mesas, feeling the pulse of something ancient and powerful in the land around me. One evening, as I watched the sun set in a blaze of color over the desert, I reflected on John Begay's parting words to us. We had indeed been marked by the land, changed in ways I was only beginning to understand. The Skinwalker, terrifying as it had been, was only a small part of a much larger tapestry. There were powers in this world far beyond our comprehension, ancient spirits that still walk the shadowy borderlands between our world and others. But I also knew that we as humans were not powerless in the face of these forces. The strength we had found within ourselves, the connection to the land and to each other, had proven more powerful than the Skinwalker's malevolent magic. As darkness fell and the first stars began to appear in the sky, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The world was far stranger and more wonderful than I had ever imagined, full of both darkness and light, and I was no longer afraid to explore its mystery. I remember that one day I would return to those wild lands, not seeking out danger, but open to whatever lessons the desert had to teach me. But while I was content to sit in the gathering darkness, listening to the whisper of the wind across the sand and feeling the beat of the ancient heart of the world. It was supposed to be an idyllic summer camping trip in the forests of northern Arizona, a chance to unplug, recharge in nature, and explore some of the state's most scenic hiking trails. Little did I know that what started as an innocent outdoor adventure would soon become the most terrifying experience of my life, thanks to a nightmarish encounter with a creature out of Native American legend. I had been fascinated by stories of skinwalkers since I first learned of them. According to Navajo lore, a skinwalker is an evil witch who can transform into any animal, often a coyote, owl, fox, wolf, or crow. By day they appear as normal people, but at night they take on animal form to inflict harm. Skinwalkers are driven by greed, vengeance, or pure malice. They cast spells, curse victims, and commit atrocious acts like murder and necrophilia. The mere mention of skinwalkers is taboo, an expression of the fear they instill. While captivated by the dark mythology, I didn't actually believe skinwalkers existed outside of folktales and campfire stories. So when my best friend Jake invited me on a week-long camping trip in the Arizona high country, not far from Navajo land, I jumped at the opportunity for a guy's outdoor adventure. We planned to camp, hike, fish, and enjoy a week, disconnected in the wild. Jake even mentioned an area rich with Anasazi ruins that we could explore. The trip sounded perfect. After a long day's drive, Jake and I arrived at a small remote campground nestled in a ponderosa pine forest, bordering wilderness as far as the eye could see. We set up our tents, got a campfire going, grilled some burgers, and cracked a couple of beers as an orange sunset faded to a star-filled sky. The calm mountain air was refreshing, and the forest was filled with the comforting sounds of chirping crickets. Coyotes howled in the distance.
See those cliffs way over there?
Jake pointed across the landscape of silhouetted trees to where the moonlight illuminated some faraway rock formations. I was studying the maps, and I think that's where those Anasazi ruins are that I told you about. If we get an early start tomorrow, bet we could hike there and back in a day. Should be a rad adventure. Oh yeah, I'm always down for some Indiana Jones-style exploring, I replied. Can't wait to see them. Jake yawned and stood up to stretch. Alright, man. I'm beat. I'm willing at the sack so we can get moving early tomorrow. See you in the end. Sounds good. Sleep well, bro. I said as Jake re-entered his tent. The campfire crackled and popped, sending embers swirling into the black sky. I sat by its warmth a bit longer, sipping my beer and soaking in the peacefulness of the forest at night. But then something caught my attention. The sound of a branch snapping in the woods nearby, followed by rustling like something moving through the brush. Probably just a deer, I thought. The sound grew closer, my ears perked up and my gut tightened a bit. The rustling stopped. Silent. I held my breath, listening intently and scanning the line of dark trees. Then I saw it. Two luminous amber eyes appeared in the shadows about 30 yards away, low to the ground, unblinking, staring directly at me. They seemed to almost glow with an unnatural light. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. A swift chill ran down my spine. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. This was no deer. The eyes started slowly approaching me, moving through the trees without a sound, gliding like an apparition. As it entered a patch of moonlight filtering through the pines, I could make out its shape, a large coyote or maybe a wolf, gray and shaggy. But there was something very wrong about the way it moved, fluid and almost supernatural. Piercing amber eyes still locked on mine. Panicked, I jumped to my feet, knocking over my beer bottle. The metal chair I was sitting on clattered loudly as it tipped. The sound startled the advancing animal, and it instantaneously vanished, darting away into the shadows, not even rustling a leaf on the forest floor. It moved faster and more silently than I'd ever seen an animal move. My heart pounded. What the hell was that thing? A wave of dread washed over me as a disturbing thought came to mind. Could it have been a skinwalker? I mentally kicked myself for even thinking something so irrational. Clearly I was just spooked and letting my imagination get the better of me. Must have been a coyote or a wolf stalking the campground looking for scraps. Perhaps it was rabid, which would explain its odd behavior. There had to be a logical explanation. I decided not to mention the unsettling incident to Jake, not wanting to unnecessarily alarm him or have him razz me for being paranoid. I doused the campfire, double-checked that our food was secure in the bear box, and retired to my tent for the night. Zipping up tight, but sleep did not come easy. I lay awake for hours in my sleeping bag, flashlight clutched tight, listening for any sound of the creature's return. I must have finally drifted off because the next thing I knew, sunlight was filtering through my tent, and Jake was shaking me awake. Rise and shine, bro. Ruin hiking day. The early bird gets the Anasazi pod shards, he said cheerfully. Groggy, I dragged myself up and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling that had followed me from the night before. Truly, in the light of day, it would seem silly. As we ate granola and dried fruit for breakfast, I made no mention of what I had seen lurking at the edge of our camp in the dark. I had convinced myself it was just a normal wild animal encounter. Jake and I hit the trail while the morning was still cool, mist rising from the ground as the sun peeked over the eastern hills. We were both experienced hikers and had topographic maps, plenty of water, and supplies to last us the day. Our destination was a spot simply marked cliff dwelling on the map, an intriguing oval ruin symbol next to a small squiggle of blue that indicated flowing water. With any luck, there would be a shaded canyon with a creek to cool off in once we reached the site. The hike started out pleasantly enough. The air was fresh and piney, stellar jays chattering and darting through the treetops. The trail led us up a series of switchbacks, ascending a ridgeline thick with pine and fir trees. Though it was summer, at this elevation, nights were chilly and patches of snow still lingered in the shadows. As we climbed higher, the trees began to thin, revealing sweeping views of the surrounding Coconino National Forest. Looming in the distance was the impressive snow-capped summit of Mount Humphreys, the highest point in Arizona. "Damn," Jake said between breaths as we crested the ridgeline and took a break to hydrate and take in the scenery. "This view just never gets old." Hard to believe all this rugged wilderness is only a couple hours from the clusterfuck of Phoenix. "No kidding," I replied. "Hey, what were you saying about Anasazi ruins? What's their deal? Sounds like they were pretty mysterious." The Anasazi were ancestral Puebloans who lived all over the Four Corners region centuries ago, like pre-Columbus, Jake explained. They were super advanced, master architects, farmers, artists, built these elaborate cliff dwellings in pueblos tucked under overhanging cliffs or along canyon walls like whole intricate cities, probably for defense. Defense for what? The Navajo, I asked. Nah, the Navajo didn't migrate to this area until way later. Could have been other tribes like the Utes or Apaches or Aztec raiders from the south, some say skinwalkers. No one knows for sure, and get this, in the late 1200s, all the Anasazi people just vanished. Vanished? Pretty much. They abandoned all their big settlements and scattered. Archaeologists have all sorts of theories about prolonged drought or resource depletion or violence, but it's a bit of a mystery. Anasazi means ancient enemy in Navajo. Some of their descendants became the modern Pueblo tribes like Hopi and Zuni, but a lot was lost to history. I'm psyched to see one of their sites firsthand. Feeling unnerved by the mention of skinwalkers, I took a long drink of water to break my silence. We better keep moving then, I said, hoisting on my pack. Jake nodded and led the way as we dropped off the other side of the ridgeline and descended into a wide, dry gully thick with gnarled pinyon pines and scraggly juniper bushes. I felt uneasy as we continued hiking, my mind flashing back to those glowing eyes from the darkness. Every rustle in the underbrush or snap of a twig made me jump. I laughed to myself, "Get a grip, man, you're being paranoid. We're the apex predators out here." My eyes scanned the boulders and trees anyway, looking for any unnatural movement. After a few hours of rugged hiking across a landscape that looked increasingly prehistoric, the environment began to change. The dusty gully we'd been following opened up into an impressive red rock box canyon, its vertical walls rising hundreds of feet high on either side, striped in desert varnish. A crystal-clear creek snaked through the canyon floor, lined with gnarled cottonwoods. It looked like a scene out of an old Western movie. "This is starting to look more promising," Jake said, as we followed the creek upstream into the narrowing canyon, its high walls providing some much-welcome midday shade. Soon, the canyon curved, and up ahead I could see that it terminated in a rounded amphitheater of red rock, with huge tapering stone pinnacles towering over it. As we drew closer to the head of the box canyon, I squinted and could barely make out what looked like structures of some kind, built under an overhanging alcove about 100 feet up one of the canyon walls. "No way," I said in disbelief. "Dude, I think that's our Anasazi ruin," Jake exclaimed, quickening his pace. "We found it. I can't believe this is still here after all these centuries." I couldn't wait to get a closer look. A sense of unease tickled the back of my mind again. Something about this hidden ancient dwelling gave me the creeps, but I couldn't deny my burning curiosity to explore it as well. If only I had known then what horrors awaited us once we climbed up to that fateful cliff dwelling from a distant vanished era. As we approached the towering canyon walls, more details of the cliff dwelling came into view. Beneath a huge overhanging sandstone alcove were the unmistakable lines of ancient stone walls. Terrace structures stacked 2 and 3 stories high. Hundreds of feet above the desert floor, tucked under the protective lip of rock, the ruins looked like a stone fortress grafted onto the cliff face, totally hidden from view until you were right up on it. "Damn, that's one epic piece of prehistoric real estate," Jake said as he craned his neck to take in the full scale of the ruins. The Anasazi definitely knew how to pick a view. Looking closer, I could see a faint line zigzagging up the canyon wall below the cliff dwelling, an ancient hand and toe trail carved into the sandstone. This must have been how the Anasazi accessed their virtuous home. "Looks like that's our way up," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt about climbing an 800-year-old rock staircase without any safety gear. Jake was already scrambling toward the base of the trail, a pep in his step. I followed more tentatively. Clearly Jake had no such qualms about an ancient stairway to heaven. As we began to ascend the narrow trail of weathered hand and footholds, butterflies swirled in my stomach. Heights weren't my favorite to begin with, but this trail made the Grand Canyon's Bright Angel look like a superhighway. The rock was sandy and crumbly in spots. Some toe holds were nearly smooth. Definitely not OSHA approved. "Hey Jake, does this seem a bit dodgy?" I called up to him. My palms were sweating and my legs felt rubbery as I hugged the cliff. If one of these holds breaks, we'll end up like a pizza on the rocks below. "I hear you, bro," Jake yelled over his shoulder, but the Anasazi didn't have climbing gear and they did this every day. "Just take it slow and steady. Don't look down." Great advice from a guy who once got his head stuck between two fence posts on a dare, I thought. And at this point, up seemed safer than down. I tried to block out the gut-churning view of the canyon floor far below and focus only on finding the next handhold, bracing my feet on the edges of the weathered footholds. I pictured Anasazi women carrying water jugs and babies on their backs up this insane route. Sweat dripped into my eye. After what felt like hours, I pulled myself over the final lip and collapsed in a heap at the foot of the ruins. My legs shook from adrenaline. Jake was already darting around like a giddy archaeology student, investigating the ancient architecture up close. "Holy shit," he said, drawing out the expletive for emphasis. "I can't believe we're actually standing here. We just climbed a staircase from the 13th century." I had to admit, now that my heart had stopped jackhammering out of my chest, that the cliff dwelling was spectacular. The stonework was impeccable, a jigsaw of expertly fitted sandstone and limestone blocks forming multi-story dwellings that seemed to defy gravity. Weathered wooden beams still supported the ceilings. Window holes looked out over breathtaking views of desert wilderness. I tried to imagine what life would have been like for the Anasazi in this incredible but perilous home. Hoarding every drop of water, every stick of firewood, every kernel of corn up that treacherous path, constantly scanning the horizon for approaching enemies or storms, sleeping, eating, raising children with the threat of a 1,000-foot fall right outside your door. The vulnerability of this place started sinking in. Jake was already ducking through a tiny doorway into the guts of the ruins. I hesitated, a tingle of trepidation running down my spine. Something felt off in a way I couldn't put my finger on. The air seemed unusually still and heavy. "Hey man, wait up," I called to Jake. "You sure it's cool for us to be poking around in here? I thought we weren't supposed to mess with ruins like this." Jake's head popped out of the dark doorway, his headlamp beam shining in my eyes. "What? You afraid of a little 800-year dust?" he chided. "Come on, I want to see if there's any intact pottery or petroglyphs or anything in here. No one will ever know. This is the chance of a lifetime." I sighed, knowing there was no stopping Jake's enthusiasm at this point. Against my better judgment, I clicked on my own headlamp and squeezed through the doorway after him. Immediately, I was hit with a musty waft of stale air that smelled faintly of smoke, guano, and something else I couldn't identify. My headlight beam caught drifting motes of dust in its bluish LED glow. The interior of the ruin was a catacomb of small stone rooms connected by even smaller doorways, more like crawl spaces. We had to crouch and sometimes crawl on our bellies to navigate between chambers. It was hard to imagine entire Anasazi families living in such compact, dark, and windowless quarters. Despite centuries of abandonment, the rooms were in remarkably good condition, testament to the skill of the builders. Sandy plaster still clung to some of the walls. Blackened ceilings indicated that these spaces had once been warmed by small cooking fires. Scattered on the dusty floor were bits of pottery sherds, corn cobs, and what looked like rodent bones. As I followed Jake deeper into the heart of the ruins, the air seemed to grow even more stagnant and oppressive, and the smell that I couldn't place grew stronger. A vague sense of unease pricked at the back of my neck. I felt like an intruder, like we were disturbing something that should not be disturbed. The headlamp beam seemed to only accentuate the heavy darkness pressing in from all sides. Jake? Hey, maybe we should head back. I called ahead to my friend, who had disappeared into yet another crumbling portal. I've got a weird feeling about this place. No answer. Jake, I tried again, louder. My voice sounded oddly muffled, like the thick stone walls were swallowing the sound. Still no reply from Jake. Unnerved, I quickened my pace, crouching and squeezing through the claustrophobic chambers as fast as I could to catch up with him. I emerged into a larger circular room with a high ceiling, some kind of central chamber. The drafting beam of my headlamp caught a large sandstone slab in the middle of the room that looked like an altar of some kind. Jake was kneeling in front of it, fixated on something. Dude, why didn't you answer me? I said, I was calling for you. I really think we should get out. Then I saw what Jake was staring at and my blood ran cold. On the altar slab was what looked like a large animal pelt, but unlike any I had ever seen before, it was a mottled combination of fur and feathers, dark and iridescent. The skin had a strange, almost human-like quality to it. And most disturbingly of all, a coyote skull sat on top of the pelt, adorned with beads, feathers, and what looked like dried blood. Suddenly, the odd smell in the ruin made horrific sense, the pungent musk of death and decay. What the hell is that? I managed to choke out. Jake slowly turned to look at me, eyes wide and face pale in the harsh light of our LEDs. I think it's a skinwalker ritual, he said, barely above a whisper. This must have been a sacred kiva chamber, and I'm pretty sure that's not just some normal animal sacrifice. A sudden recognition washed over me like a wave of icy water. The skinwalker legend, the creature I saw lurking in our camp, with his glowing eyes, skinwalking. It wasn't just a myth. The Unasazi had been running from something terrifyingly real. We need to get the fuck out of here, I said to Jake, my voice cracking with panic. No. Jake nodded mutely, still transfixed by the macabre altar. We turned to make our way back through the labyrinth and froze. There, reflected in the beam of my headlamp, two orbs, glowing amber eyes. Staring at us from the inky shadows of the doorway we had just passed through, the eyes blinked once. Slowly, then emerged fully into the dim circle of light. It was the same creature I had seen at the campground, but now, up close, I could see it more clearly. It had the body of a coyote, but bigger, taller than a wolf. Its fur was patchy, falling out in places as if diseased, and there was something horribly off about the shape of its elongated limb. Its movements jerky and unnatural, like a coyote carcass manipulated by some unseen puppeteer. The stench of rotting flesh was overwhelming. The creature took a step towards us, bones and tendons popping beneath mangy skin. The low growl reverberated from its throat, like no animal sound I'd ever heard. Jake and I remained paralyzed with abject terror, our minds struggling to process the nightmare shambling towards us. In an instant of pure adrenaline-fueled panic, my fight-or-flight response finally kicked in. I grabbed Jake by the backpack, breaking his terrified trance. Run! Or scream! The skinwalker lunged. We bolted, careening blindly through the ruins, with the impossible horror right on our heels. I had no idea if we were running deeper into the cliffside tomb or towards an escape. The creature's ragged panting echoed off the narrow stone walls. Fangs snapped at our ankles. We squeezed through one final doorway and suddenly burst out into blinding desert sunlight, back onto the precarious face of the cliff. The ruined entrance loomed behind us like the threshold to a nightmare realm, dark and hungry. The trail, go! I yelled, shoving Jake ahead of me towards the zigzagging hand-and-toe path, our only route of escape above the sheer drop. Jake started scrambling down the exposed stone staircase, going as fast as possible on the crumbling footholds. I risked a look over my shoulder and immediately wished I hadn't. The skinwalker was emerging from the ruin into daylight, its matted fur smoldering as if burned by the sun's holy rays. But still, it came, hell-bent on us. Half climbing, half falling, Jake and I made our perilous descent down the cliff face, certain that one slip would send us plummeting to our deaths on the canyon floor far below. My hands were slick with fierce sweat, barely able to grip the handholds. Chunks of soft sandstone crumbled underfoot as I climbed down. I could hear the clatter of canine claws on stone behind and above me. The skinwalker was in the cliff-dwelling trail as well, defying gravity in its ravenous pursuit. After what felt like an eternity of panic scrambling, the canyon floor was finally within reach. I hollowed myself off the final toehold and turned just in time to see the skinwalker leaping straight off the cliff from 20 feet up, its macabre body silhouetted against the sun. Time seemed to slow down as I watched its jump arc towards me. Yellow fangs bared, dead eyes alight with malevolence. I hit the ground and rolled, the creature landing where I had been standing a millisecond before with a bone-crunching thud. Jake was already sprinting towards the creek bed. I launched to my feet and followed, my heart feeling like it would blast through my ribcage. "Don't look back. Keep running," Jake called over his shoulder. I didn't need to be told twice. The guttural snarls of the skinwalker echoed off the high stone walls as it gave chase. My lungs and leg muscles screamed in agony, but I pushed on, leaping over boulders and crashing through dense underbrush, desperate to put distance between myself and the prehistoric predator. Ahead, the canyon curved, and I caught a glimpse of Jake disappearing around the sandstone fins at a full sprint. A faint glimmer of hope surged through my spent body. If we could just make it back to the open wilderness, back to our camp, maybe we would have a chance. I tried to block out the snarls and panting breath right behind me, hot on my heels. I summoned a last burst of adrenaline and careened around the sharp bend in the canyon, slamming straight into Jake's backpack. He had stopped dead in his tracks, wheezing. I looked up to see what had halted Jake's flight, and my stomach turned to ice. There in front of us, blocking the mouth of the canyon, a row of dark figures stood in silent formation. As my eyes adjusted to the light, I could see they were men dressed in strange tribal garb of feathers and animal skins. Their skin was deeply tanned and weathered, their long dark hair braided. But most unsettling of all, over each of their faces they wore snarling coyote masks, the same ghastly visage as the skinwalker behind us. We were surrounded, trapped between terrors in front and behind. I stared into the glinting obsidian eyes of the masked shaman directly before me. He spoke in a raspy, guttural tongue that I did not understand, but his meaning was clear. These were no mere men. We were in the presence of the skinwalkers themselves, the ancient enemy of the Anasazi, the source of centuries of unspeakable horror. The growl of the creature in pursuit grew louder by the second, padding slowly closer, relishing our helplessness. I could feel Jake trembling next to me, paralyzed by fear. This is how we would die, alone in this canyon, far from any other soul, torn apart by the jaws of myth made manifest. As if sensing our surrender, the masked shaman raised a hand in a single commanding gesture. He barked a short, harsh phrase in his native tongue. Incredible, the skinwalker that had been stalking us skidded to a halt, still panting and salivating, but leashed by some invisible bond to its master. Slowly, the shaman lowered his hand and reached into a pouch at his waist. I braced myself to meet my fate, too mesmerized to run or fight any longer. But what the shaman pulled out was not a weapon, but a small deerskin pouch adorned with beads and ancient symbols. He held it out to us in his weathered palm. "Take," he said in thickly accented but understandable English. "Take and go. Never return." My hand moved as if pulled by another worldly force. I reached out and grabbed the strange medicine pouch from the shaman's hand. As soon as I touched it, a shockwave of icy energy shot up my arm and across my scalp. Without another word, the shaman raised both arms high. He began to chant in an eerie, yowling rhythm. The other masked men joined in, and their voices swelled into a crescendo of sound that shook the very walls of the canyon. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, skinwalkers were gone, vanished like a desert mirage. The canyon was empty except for Jake and me. Even the creature that had pursued us was nowhere to be seen. Jake turned to me, his eyes like mirrors reflecting my own disbelief and incomprehension. "What hell just happened?" he croaked. I looked down at the medicine pouch, clenched in my white-knuckled fist. "I don't know, but I think we just got the only warning we're going to get. You need to get out of here, now." We made the hike back to camp in a daze, stumbling on autopilot, our senses raw. Neither of us spoke a word, too shocked to even attempt to process what we had experienced. It felt like a waking nightmare, seared into our minds. It wasn't until we reached the blessed sight of our tents and gear that the adrenaline began to ebb, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But there's no question of spending another night in those woods. Not after what we had seen, what we now knew to be real. We threw our gear haphazardly into our packs, not bothering to collapse the tents, jumped into the car and tore down the forest road in a cloud of gravel, putting as much distance as possible between us and the horrors that lurked in the canyons and ruins. It wasn't until the turnoff for the interstate came into view that I finally let myself breathe again. That was a decade ago. Jake and I stayed close for a while after our ordeal, bonded by the scars of a shared trauma. But even that began to feel cursed with time. We drifted apart, unable to look each other in the eye without being hurled back to that terrible place. I've never breathed a word of what happened to anyone who would believe it. I scarcely believe it myself most days, just a bad dream brought on by campfire stories and imagination. But then I remember those glowing amber eyes, the stench of ancient death, the skinwalkers cloaked in myth as real as the sun. And always, I remember the medicine pouch pressed close against my chest. I do not know what magic it contains, what old power guards me, but I have not removed it for 10 years, cannot bring myself to test its protection. I will never set foot in those wild Arizona woods again. But I know that out there, under some lonely stone cliff, an ancient evil still walks with the skin of beasts, waiting, watching, hungry. Some myths should not be disturbed, but if you dare, hiker beware, for you may just become part of the skinwalker's story yourselves. Journal entry, July 20th. It's been 10 years to the day since the incident in the woods with Jake, the incident that nearly cost us our lives and sanity, and the incident that I've been trying desperately to forget ever since. I still have nightmares about that encounter at the Anasazi cliff dwelling. The image of that creature, the skinwalker, with its mangy coyote form and glowing amber eyes, is seared into my brain like a brand. I can still smell its fetid breath, still feel its hot pursuit on my heels as Jake and I fled in pure mortal terror. And the shaman, with his eerie coyote mask and beads. I still don't understand what happened when he stopped the creature and handed me that medicine pouch. Why did he let us go? What ancient power did he invoke to call off our death? I've spent countless sleepless nights trying to rationalize it all away. Hallucinations brought on by altitude sickness, a bad peyote trip, or some elaborate hoax. Anything but accepting the reality of what Jake and I had experienced out there. But deep down I know the truth. The skinwalkers are real as the sun and stone, an ancient evil written off as myth and legend until you come face to face with it, until you become part of their story. I've tried to move on with my life since that fateful camping trip, threw myself into my work, relationships, hobbies, anything to drive away the insomnia and the constant gnawing dread that has become my personal ghost. But no matter how far I run or how deeply I try to bury the memories, I can fathom out there still, stalking the edges of my consciousness. I touch the medicine pouch around my neck, a reflexive gesture now, reminding myself of how close I came to a terrible fate. Sometimes I'm gripped by a reckless urge to return to those woods, to confront the demons of that place once and for all, and prove to myself there's nothing to fear. But all in my heart, I can never go back, not in this lifetime. I lost Jake as a result of that day. We were bonded by the trauma for a short, intense time after it happened, but the shared weight of our memories eventually became too much to bear. We drifted apart, unable to look each other in the eye without being transported back to that canyon, back to the jaws of impossible horror. I often wonder if Jake is still out there, if he still wears his own medicine pouch, clutched close to his heart, if he's found a way to silence the screams that echo in his mind as they do in mine. I know I should reach out, but I cannot bring myself to dial his number, cannot pick at the scab of an unhealed wound, so I endure. I survive. I carry the story of the skinwalkers etched on my soul like a secret scar, a reminder that there are ancient things that walk in the wilderness, hungry things, waiting for the unwise to stumble into their domain. If my tale can serve as a warning, let it be this. Be careful what myths you chase, for you may just find them and they may take you for their own. I still see the glow of those ember eyes when I close my own. Still feel the hot breath of the skinwalker on the back of my neck, but I escaped. By chance or dark blessing, I escaped, and that is enough. It has to be, for I know I will never be free of the skinwalkers. Not really. They will forever haunt the lonely places in the map of my heart, but I am still here, still alive to fear them, and that is a story of its own.